Session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us observe a minute of silent prayer. Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 13 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a 14. With 14 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 10th session, Tuesday, August 15, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, motion is approved.
May I have a 1 minute suspension, Mr.
Session
President?
is suspended. Oh, tama. Na-defer yun eh.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I'd like to acknowledge guests of the Senate, Mayor Jet Rojas of the province of Iloilo, and then Sibac Regional Coordinator led by Congressman Sherwin Tugna. Also, we have the guests of Senator Aquino, Secretary Chair Teresita Herbosa, SEC Chair, I'm sorry, SEC Chair Teresita Herbosa, LRA Deputy Administrator Ronald Ortile, Department of Finance Undersecretary Gil Beltran, Griselda Santos, Senior Financial Sector, Anthony Abad, Pia Roman Tayag, Bank Association of the Philippines, Trip Banks, and IPO BIR. The handwriting of the one who presented this, Mr. President, is something to be desired.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary, let us do the reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 9 August 2017, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. 5907, creating an additional branch of regional trial court to be stationed in the municipality of Iba, province of Zambales. 198, creating an additional regional trial court branch in the province of Leyte to be stationed in the city of Baybay. 5903, creating 3 additional branches of the regional trial court in the province of Laguna to be stationed in Calamba City. 5904, creating 2 additional branches of the regional trial court in the 1st judicial region to be stationed in the city of Batak, province of Ilocos Norte. 5905, creating 2 additional branches of the Metropolitan Trial Court to be stationed in Malabon City, Metro Manila. 5906, creating an additional branch of the Regional Trial Court to be stationed in the municipality of Bungabong, and 4 additional branches of the Municipal Trial Court to be stationed in the municipalities of Bansud, Bulalakaw, Gloria, and Mansalay, all in the province of Oriental Mindoro. 5932, creating 2 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court in the province of Leyte to be stationed in Ormoc City.
Referred to the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
1924, converting the Land Transportation Office, Madeline Extension Office into a regular district office. 3169, converting the Land Transportation Office, Licensing Center in the city of Batangas, province of Batangas, into a regular licensing center. 4065, establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office in the city of Panabo, province of Davao del Norte. 4166, converting the Land Transportation Office, licensing center in the city of San Pablo, province of Laguna, into a regular licensing center. 4765, establishing an extension office and the Land Transportation Office in the municipality of Brooks Point, province of Palawan. 59454, establishing a Land Transportation Office, satellite office in the municipality of Malay, province of Aklan. 5958, establishing an extension office of the Land Transportation Office in the municipality of Nara, province of Palawan. 5992, converting the satellite office of the Land Transportation Office in the city of Bayugan, province of Agusan del Sur, into a regular district office.
To the Committees on Public Services and Finance.
4274, upgrading the Southern Isabela General Hospital in Santiago City, province of Isabela, into a tertiary general hospital to be known as the Southern Isabela Medical Center.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
5754, separating the Rizal National School of Arts and Trades, Santor Extension in Barangay Santor, Municipality of Rizal, Province of Kalinga, from the Rizal National School of Arts and Trades, converting it into an independent national high school to be known as the Santor National High School. 5756, establishing a national high school in Barangay Dipasi, Municipality of Bayog, Province of Zamboanga del Sur, to be known as Dipasi National High School. 5758, separating the Bocod National High School, Daklan Extension in Barangay Daklan, Municipality of Bocod, Province of Benguet, from the Bocod National High School, converting it into an independent national high school to be known as Daklan National High School.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and Finance.
5880, upgrading the Amay Pakpak Medical Center in Marawi City, province of Lanao del Sur. 5881, establishing the Sox Sergeant General Hospital in the municipality of Surala, province of South Cotabato.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
Bills on first reading. Senate Bill number 1551, an act amending Section 1 of Presidential Decree number 1606 as amended, or the law creating the Sandigan Bayan. Senator Escudero.
Kanina. Second. To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1552, an act postponing the October 2017 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataang elections, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9164 as amended by Republic Act number 9340, Republic Act number 10656, Republic Act number 10923, and for other purposes, Senator Richard Gordon.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1553, an act creating the Department of Disaster and Emergency Management, defining its powers and functions, appropriating Funds, therefore, and for other purposes, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on National Defense and Security, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
1554, an act abolishing the Road Board as the regulatory agency of the Motor Vehicle Users Charge and transferring its powers and function to the Department of Public Works and Highways and to the Department of Transportation, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Public Works and Public Services.
1555, an act integrating palliative and hospice care into the Philippine healthcare system, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Ways and Means and Finance.
1556, an act creating the Commission on Immigration, defining its powers and functions, expanding, rationalizing, and further professionalizing its organization, upgrading the compensation and benefits of its officials and employees, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Ligarda.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
Resolutions. 464, resolution congratulating, commending, and honoring the UPs for bringing glory and honor to the Philippines by successfully defending their title in the 2017 World Hip Hop Dance Championship, Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Rules.
465, resolution congratulating, commending, and honoring the young Filipino math Olympians who brought glory and prestige to the Philippines by dominating the recent Singapore International Math Olympiad Challenge and the 13th International Mathematics Contest, Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Rules.
466, resolution congratulating and commending Team Philippines for bagging the top honors and winning 205 medals at the highly coveted 21st World Championships of Performing Arts held in Long Beach, California, USA, held last June 30 to July 9, 2017, Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Rules.
467, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the numerous reports of real estate subdivision and condominium buyers on the alleged unlawful practices committed by real estate developers, owners, and sellers, and their failure to comply with the balanced housing development program, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement.
468, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the possible violation of Republic Act Number 9160 as amended, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act, by some covered institutions as defined in the AMLA, with the end in view of recommending further measures to promote efficient compliance with the AMLA and amending further the said law, Senator Soto III and Lacson.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Communications. Letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas submitting to the Senate the report to Congress on public sector foreign loans approved by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas in the first quarter of 2017 pursuant to Section 20, Article 7 of the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Letter from the Department of National Defense submitting to the Senate the calendar year 2016 third quarter report on the Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program.
To the Committee on National Defense and Security.
Letter from the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority submitting to the Senate the statement of allotment, obligations, utilization, and balances as of March 31, 2017 of the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority, anent to the special provisions in the fiscal year 2017 General Appropriations Act.
To the Committees on Finance and Agriculture and Food.
Letter from the Department of Labor and Employment submitting to the Senate its semi-annual report to Congress, July to December 2016, based on the submission of the Philippine Overseas Labor Offices pursuant to Rule 17, Sections 2 and 3 of Republic Act Number 122.
To the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
Letter from the Government Service Insurance System, submitting to the Senate its investment portfolio report as of December 31, 2016, in compliance with Section 36 of Republic Act Number 8291 or the GSIS Act of 1997.
To the Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises.
Letter from the Department of Health, submitting to the Senate its 2016 annual report on the implementation of responsible parenthood and reproductive health law in compliance with Section 21 of Republic Act 10354.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
Letter from the Department of Social Welfare and Development, submitting to the Senate the list of Pantawid Pamilya Program beneficiaries as of March 2017 and Pantawid Pamilya Program's first quarter accomplishment report for calendar year 2017 in compliance with Republic Act Number 10924 or the General Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2017, particularly the special provision on the conditional cash transfer program.
To the Committees on Finance and Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development.
Committee report. Committee report number 155, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, National Defense and Security, and Finance on Senate Bill number 1557 with Senators Drilon, Trillanes IV, Ligarda, Angara, and Honasan II as authors thereof, entitled An Act Modifying the Salary Schedule for Civilian Government Personnel and authorizing the grant of additional benefits for both civilian and military and uniformed personnel, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 1390, 998, and 1010. Senator Trillanes IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of the following Senate bills related. Senate Bill 1103, under Committee Report 131, and Senate Bill 884, under Committee Report 132.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, yesterday, Senator Chis Escudero made an omnibus sponsorship on several House and Senate measures on the creation, renaming of and establishments of schools in various localities. However, Senator J.B. Ercito also made a reservation to deliver a co-sponsorship speech on the two measures considered. So may we therefore move to recognize Senator J.B. Ercito for his co-sponsorship speech.
Senator Ercito is recognized.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, today it is my honor to co-sponsor Senate Bill numbers 1103 and 884 under Committee Report numbers 131 and 132 or the PUP Sablayan Campus Act and PUP San Juan Campus Act. The 1987 Philippine Constitution provides that the state shall protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. To give life to the provision of the Constitution, Presidential Decree number 1341 or the charter creating the Polytechnic University of the Philippines was issued. Under PD 1341, PUP shall primarily provide higher occupational, technical, and professional instruction and training in the applied arts and sciences. It shall also promote applied research, advanced studies, and progressive leadership in the stated fields. Likewise, PUP is mandated to disperse its programs in the countryside through a system of regional branches. The high demand for a state university in regional areas in the country has been consistent. Henceforth, the PUP Sablayan Campus in the Occidental Mindoro was established. It has been in operation for 7 years now, under a memorandum of agreement between PUP Board of Regents and the municipal government of Sablayan. In the same manner, Mr. President, the PUP San Juan Campus inception was established through the initiative of the City Council and yours truly, when this representation was still the mayor of the city of San Juan on January 21, 2008. Through the efforts of the city government of San Juan and PUP officers, the PUP Board of Regents approved and ratified the Memorandum of Agreement for the establishment of the San Juan campus. During the first year, the first semester of operation, PUP San Juan had about 391 students enrolled in different courses. Over the years, total number of enrollment increased. Every year, more than 400 freshman students are being admitted and added to the population of the said campus. There is more than 400% initial already since the initial first semester. Due to the increasing number of students in PUP San Juan, the funding for the campus has become a challenge to the city government of San Juan. The needed modern facilities that will help students to be more competitive has been put into back burner because of other urgent necessary needs of the residents of the city. The same has also been one of the challenges of PUP Sablayan Campus. Mr. President, PUP Sablayan Campus and San Juan Campus was instituted because of the desires of the local government concerned to address the needs of its constituents. As such, the expenses for the operation of both campuses have been lodged to the said local government units without funding support from the national government. As the resources of local government units are limited, there is a need to guarantee the necessary educational facilities and human resources of both campuses, which will be provided for the benefit of the students. The enactment into law of Senate Bill number 884 and Senate Bill number 1103 will ensure that PUP San Juan Campus and PUP Sablayan Campus will receive continued support and funding from the national government through allotment in the annual General Appropriations Act. More importantly, this will promote growth and modernization of the campus facilities that will help the students to be more competitive. Today, when education should be considered as a commodity, there has been a vast migration to state colleges and universities. It has been a matter of immediate concern for some, but rather than be alarmed, let us see this as a great opportunity to further address the needs of our students, our people. When parents enroll their children in the public school system, we should consider this as a sign of confidence in our educational programs. The government has been able to provide not only an alternative to our people, but fulfill its obligation. Mr. President, in the view of the foregoing, I urge everyone to support this measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to give time to the senators to study the measures, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1103 and Senate Bill 884.
Is there any objection? There being none, approved.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Senate Bill 1455 under Committee Report 138.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1455 under Committee Report 138.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary, Senate Bill number 1455.
An act declaring the Filipino Sign Language as the national sign language of the Filipino Deaf and the official sign language of government in all transactions involving the deaf, mandating its use in schools, broadcast media, and workplaces.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask that Senator Bam Aquino be recognized to deliver his sponsorship speech. Afterward, Senator Lauren Legarda will deliver a co-sponsorship speech, and Senator Nancy Binay will deliver her co-sponsorship speech next week.
Next, okay.
Senator Bam Aquino.
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Magandang hapon po, Mr. President, mga kapwa senador, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Mr. President, it's an honor and a privilege to address you today to sponsor Senate Bill number 1455 under Committee Report number 138, an act declaring the Filipino Sign Language as the national sign language of the Filipino Deaf and the official sign language of government in all transactions involving the deaf and mandating its use in schools, broadcast media, and workplaces, otherwise known as the Filipino Sign Language Act. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, deaf Filipinos deserve to have an official language that honors our diverse cultures and colorful history. Kailangan po natin ng opisyal na wika upang epektibo ang pakikipag-usap natin sa mga bingi. Naniniwala po kami, Mr. President, na ang Filipino Sign Language or FSL ang pinakaangkop na national sign language. Mr. President, I was surprised to learn from Dr. Liza Martinez, an esteemed Filipino sign linguist, that the use of sign language in the Philippines dates back to 1596. Higit sa 400 taon na ang nakalipas nang nailathala ng isang paring Heswita ang kwento ng 2 batang lalaki na gumagamit ng sign language sa Dulag, Leyte. Ito po ang unang record ng Filipino Sign Language sa ating bansa, Mr. President. Now, in the year 2017, FSL has evolved to be an effective visual language that is well-researched, based on Filipino culture and history, and even incorporates indigenous elements. Thus, Mr. President, the Filipino Sign Language Act seeks to recognize Filipino Sign Language, or FSL, as the national sign language and endeavors to bring FSL to the mainstream. This measure will make FSL the medium of instruction in educating deaf learners and will ensure the development of an FSL curriculum. This measure will make FSL the official mode of communication of the deaf for government services, calling for trained interpreters in various government offices. This will be particularly helpful in our courts and police stations, so the deaf Filipinos have a fair shake in our justice system. The FSL Act will also make FSL the means of interpretation in broadcast media, delivering news and information consistently to the deaf community. Mr. President, ngayon ay pinagdiriwang po natin ang buwan ng wika, nararapat lang na bigyan rin po natin ng pambansang wika ang mga kababayan nating bingi. Let's include the deaf community in our celebration of language, culture, and history. Let's build a more inclusive Philippine society and give the deaf community better access to government services, information, education, and justice. Mr. President, mga kapwa senador, ipasa po natin ang Filipino Sign Language Act. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Legarda? A Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I move that the co-sponsorship speech of Senator Lauren Legarda be inserted into the records. Likewise, the later.
Yes,
just that. Next week, Senator Nancy Binay will deliver a co-sponsorship speech.
let the speech of Senator Legarda be inserted into the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the senators to study the measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1455 under Committee Report 138.
No objection. Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill 1528 under Committee Report 137.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, yesterday, Senator Escudero made a motion to use the explanatory note as contained in the original bills filed be considered as the sponsorship speech on the measure that we are now tackling, Senate Bill 1528. This is establishing the Department of Culture. However, the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon, disagreed to the motion, saying that it is important that we have a sponsorship speech delivered considering the importance of the bill. We are creating a new department. So, Senator Escudero has requested, has expressed his compliance with the request of the Minority Leader, and we will now ask the principal author of the bill, Senator Lauren Legarda, be recognized to deliver her sponsorship speech. In the meantime, also, Senator Escudero will submit his sponsorship speech on the measure, Mr. President.
Okay. So the speech of Senator Escudero will be inserted into the records.
records.
Okay, so that's good. And then Senator Legarda is recognized for her sponsorship speech.
Mr. President, I rise to express my full support for Senate Bill number 1529, an act strengthening the National Museum of the Philippines, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 8492, otherwise known as a National Museum Act of 1998. In the 16 years since the National Museum Act of 1998 was approved by President Fidel V. Ramos, the National Museum, as the Philippines' preeminent universal museum institution, has made great strides in realizing the legislative intention embodied in that landmark statute. It was established
Mr.
as a
President.
country's primary museum.
Excuse Senator Legarda. Excuse us.
I heard you say national.
We have a 1 minute suspension,
Session
Mr. President.
suspended.
I heard you say National Museum. Fine. Wait, what? 1 minute.
Pakitanong if we're ready. Diyan patanong mo kung ready na. Hindi man yung tinit. Tinesting ko.
Loren?
Ready.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, for the record, after the Senate President recognized Senator Loren Legarda, I move to delete all of the phrases contained thereafter until the time that we move for a suspension, Mr. President.
Is there any objection to the motion of the Majority Leader? The reason being,
The reason is because Senate Bill 1528 is very close to Senate Bill 1529.
okay.
And the sponsor
The
was
speech
not
was about-
wearing her glasses, and she read 1529.
Fine, okay, so that's for the benefit of our colleagues. So any
I would
objections?
own up to the mistake.
Yes,
I was
ma'am.
not
Any-
wearing my glasses and I read 1529 instead of 1528.
Yes, so any objection to the motion, there being none, motion is approved. So,
Thank you, Mr. President. So may we now again continue to recognize Senator Loren Legarda to sponsor Senate Bill 1528.
okay. Senator Legarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 2011, National Artist for Literature and current chair of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Virgilio Almario, National Artist for Music, Ramon Santos, and Dr. Jose Dalisay Jr. prepared a study entitled Culture for National Unity, a proposal for the establishment of a Department of Culture. Allow me to quote two paragraphs of the study to stress on the importance of the development of arts and culture and the need to create a full-scale department. Filipinos direly need a sense of national identity. This is crucial to the nation's future. A sense of national identity, the sense of a common heritage and a shared past, and therefore a shared stake in the outcome of the country's present strivings and struggles. If Filipinos are to respect themselves, and if they seek to gain the respect and recognition of the world at large, they must first find their soul and cherish it. That is the mission of culture, and of the Department of Culture we envisage and propose. Mr. President, it is in this context that I sponsor today Senate Bill number 1528 under Committee Report 137, an act establishing the Department of Culture, appropriating funds therefore other purposes. Art and culture is essential for nation building and to instill pride of place. But oftentimes we see art as merely a form of expression without realizing that it is an enabler of development. We see culture as a form of entertainment, sometimes something we can appreciate in museums and during special events without realizing that it is our identity. With the establishment of a Department of Culture, we seek to mainstream culture and arts into the government's development agenda. We are pleased that this measure is among the priority legislation of this administration, as espoused in the Culture chapter of the Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022. Likewise, this was endorsed to Malacanang as one of the priority legislative agenda of the Human Development and Poverty Reduction Cabinet Cluster. Excuse me. The creation of the said department is essential to having a legitimate government body that would coordinate all activities of promoting national identity and culture. As such, there would be a seat in the cabinet. This means that the department will have a head that will be treated as equal by the heads of other government departments and bureaus. It means that the concern of culture would be mainstreamed in institutional development. There will now be a national body that will develop, manage, and be responsible for the implementation of policy, legislation, and strategic direction for the protection, safeguarding, regulation, preservation, development, management, dissemination, and promotion of Philippine culture and the arts. Under the proposed department, there will be 6 bureaus: the Bureau of Cultural Communities and Traditional Arts Development, the Bureau of Cultural Properties Protection and Regulation, the Bureau of Cultural Properties Preservation, the Bureau of Artistic Resources Development, the Bureau of Cultural Research, Education, and Dissemination, the Bureau of Cultural and Creative Industries. The creation of the department would also rationalize all the existing duplications of functions from among the current concerned cultural agencies or government offices. Activities will be coordinated, which will require full cooperation of other departments, such as in the cases involving the conservation, preservation, and safeguarding of our national heritage and patrimony. There will be adequate mandate and police power in continuing the preservation and conservation efforts. At present, there are agencies for culture and arts that are under different departments, such as the National Museum and the National Book Development Board, which are under the Department of Education. The Intramuros Administration, Nayong Filipino Foundation, National Parks Development Committee, which are attached agencies of the Department of Tourism. The following agencies will now be attached to this department: the Cultural Center of the Philippines, National Museum, National Historical Commission, National Library, National Archives, Komisyon ng Wikang Filipino, Intramuros Administration, National Parks Development Committee, Nayong Filipino, Film Development Council, National Book Development Board, Design Center of the Philippines. Moreover, the following national institutes with their respective networks throughout the country will be established under the department: the National Institute of Living Traditions, which will be responsible for programs related to the safeguarding, sustainability, propagation, and intergenerational transmission of intangible cultural heritage, particularly that which pertains to indigenous cultural communities. The Schools of Living Traditions will be under this institute. National Institute of Cultural Heritage Preservation, which will be responsible for programs related to national capacity building in the area of conservation, arts, sciences, and trades, with respect to the preservation of immovable and movable cultural property, and with a particular focus on vocational training for the youth. Escuela Taller, or workshop schools, will be established under this institute. National Institute of Culture and Arts Management, which will be responsible for programs related to the education, training, and certification of cultural officers and personnel as a necessary qualification for employment and promotion in the national government and in local governments. There will also be a National Academy of Culture and Arts, an association of the nation's foremost leaders and exponents of culture and the arts, the primary purpose of which is to support the mandate of the department as an independent body of eminent persons. The amount needed for the initial implementation of the measure will be taken from the current appropriation for the NCCA. All other existing cultural agencies that will be under the department also have their respective budgets under the General Appropriations Act. The following year, a budget of not less than 2 billion pesos shall be appropriated for the operations and maintenance of the Department of Culture. It is time that we change the mindset that culture is merely for entertainment, tourism, or leisure. Our culture is our soul, our identity. It is what binds us Filipinos, no matter how diverse we are. We can no longer allow it to be merely on the hindquarters of nation building. The Department of Culture will promote a national identity, which will provide our nation a strong sense of direction and order of priorities, and that identity should be at the core of our development if what we strive is to be truly a sovereign nation. For these reasons, I support Senator Escudero, the chairman of the Education Committee, and I urge my colleagues to lend their valuable support for the swift passage of these measures. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Angara.
President, I would like to associate myself with the measure and with the consent of the lady from Antique and the gentleman from Sorsogon, if I may be a co-sponsor of the measure, because I believe that culture is crucial to nation building. Thank you, Mr. President.
Of course, Mr. President, it will be our honor to have Senator Angara, who he himself is not just an art collector of Philippine art, but also a supporter of contemporary Filipino artists. So I'm certain that the sponsor, Senator Escudero, would also be willing to be helped during the period of interpellations for the creation of the department. Yes.
Senator Subiri.
Mr. President, I would like to also be co-author of the said measure, if it's possible, if the authors would agree. Together with the other seatmates, I'm being told by my colleagues here, Senator J.V. Ejercito, Senator Joel Villanueva, and I'm sure Senator Sherwin also would like to agree, but he's busy, he's studying. But that's all, Mr. President. Thank
I'm
you.
certain that the
I'd like to just to add,
sponsor-
Mr. President, that the culture is the heart and soul of any nation. In the absence of culture, the nation is stale, Your Honor. So I'm in full support of this measure. Thank you.
So let the record reflect the co-authorship
Another.
of the senators named
Yes.
by Senator Subiri.
Let me
Another
just respond
co-author,
to Senator
Senator
Subiri.
Ontiveros, Mr. President.
A
Let me
response
just
first.
respond to Senator Subiri. Yes, of course, we welcome the intervention of Senator Subiri and welcome him and the other senators mentioned as co-sponsors of the measure. I speak for the principal sponsor, Senator Escudero. Where is he?
They want to be co-authors, ma'am. So let the co-authorship be reflected. So Senator Ontiveros is recognized.
Salamat, Mr. President. With the agreement of the principal author and the sponsor today, the gentlewoman from Antique, I would also respectfully request to be included as a co-author of this measure in recognition of the fact that culture is, yes, it includes all the beautiful artistic expressions alive in our country today, but that being just one of the worldviews and the life ways that encompass what we mean by culture as Filipinos and as a people. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, also for the record, the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon, has requested that he be registered as the first interpellator of the measure. President, I move to suspend Senate Bill 1529. No, 1528.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Yeah. Mr. President, by the way, would like to acknowledge the presence of the incumbent barangay captains of Valenzuela City. They are here today joining us,
Welcome.
guests of Senator Gatchalian.
Welcome to our barangay officials.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill 1529 under Committee Report 140.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move, I'm sorry, Mr. President, my motion is to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special
Any
orders.
objection to the corrected motion? Hearing none, approved.
Then I move to consider Senate Bill 1529 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Secretary, please read the title.
An act is strengthening the National Museum of the Philippines, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 8492, otherwise known as the National Museum Act of 1998, and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, to, well, also in this measure, may we ask Senator J.B. Ejercito be recognized. Then afterwards, Senator Legarda will deliver her aborted co-sponsorship speech.
Senator Ejercito is recognized.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, it is my honor to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 1529, or the National Museum of the Philippines Act. Museums hold the nation's cultural wealth in trust for all generations. They serve as a channel to development because their existence encourages, promotes, and fosters the best of the cultural and democratic ideals of the nations. The fundamental objective of a museum is to educate. Also, it promotes unity in the society by promoting cultural diplomacy that engenders greater understanding between the people and their nation. They use their collections to make people understand their heritage. Republic Act number 8492, otherwise known as the National Museum Act of 1998, was passed into law giving the museum its own separate mandate as a permanent institution. Said law was enacted to establish the National Museum's mandate to acquire, document, preserve, exhibit, and foster scholarly study and appreciation of works of arts, specimens, and historical artifacts. Republic Act No. 8490 is also being pursued to provide for a profoundly new structure in terms of governance, independence, flexibility, sustainability, and strong private sector involvement, purposely transforming the museum from a dormant bureau-level agency to a dynamic cultural, scientific, and educational institution, successful in any present-day conditions. Thus, cultural development of the Filipino people through the perpetuation, enhancement, and advancement of the Filipinos' national culture founded on the principle of unity in diversity in a climate of free artistic and intellectual expression may be sustained. Mr. President, however, despite such legislation, there is a need to strengthen the role of the National Museum as the premier institution and repository of the best of the natural and cultural heritage of the Philippines and boost its operations requirements. To give the museum a measure of financial relief, the proposed measure seeks to authorize the National Museum to retain and use its income derived from all sources of its operations nationwide and overseas. Moreover, the provisions of the proposed bill will promote the attainment of the goals of the National Museum to disseminate scientific and technical knowledge in more understandable and practical forms, to conduct basic research programs, combining integrated laboratory and fieldwork in anthropology, archaeology, and zoology, and be the lead in the study and preservation of the nation's rich artistic, historical, and cultural heritage. In view of the foregoing, Mr. President, I urge this body to immediately pass the National Museum of the Philippines Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ligarda is recognized for her sponsorship speech.
I wish to express my full support for Senate Bill 1529, an act strengthening the National Museum of the Philippines, repealing for the purpose Republic Act 8492, otherwise known as the National Museum Act of 1998. In the 16 years since the National Museum Act of 1998 was approved by President Fidel V. Ramos, the National Museum of the Philippines, preeminent universal museum institution, has made great strides in realizing the legislative intention embodied in this landmark statute. It was established as the country's primary museum, tasked to acquire documents, preserve, exhibit, and foster scholarly study and appreciation of works of art, specimens, cultural and historical artifacts, and material evidence of the human form and the human environment. It must also endeavor to inform the general public about these activities for the purpose of study, education, and entertainment. However, various factors have been identified as constraining the National Museum from being as effective as it might be, and for keeping pace with the evolving nature of similar museum institutions around the world. Amidst the changes being undertaken by the National Museum now to improve its existing collections and redevelop its facilities, the bill seeks to build upon the National Museum Act of 1998 and replace it with a more comprehensive charter. The salient features of this bill are as follows: clarification of the functions and organization of its Board of Trustees and expansion of its membership, strengthening the management by upgrading and expanding management positions to better oversee the operations of the National Museum, particularly in the regions, consolidation and enlargement of the National Museum complex in Rizal Park by further appropriating to it for its exclusive development and use of public funds or public lands between or contiguous with its existing buildings, dedicating the entire complex to Dr. Jose Rizal, and prescribing the formulation of a master plan for the same, with the purpose of establishing a large and cohesive cultural, educational, and recreational precinct. Full retention of the income of the National Museum from all sources generated by virtue of its operations. The authority to accept anonymous donations from visitors as gratuities, as well as prescribe a schedule of recommended donations in lieu of admission fees, which shall not be charged, and greater clarification regarding the disposition of income and donated funds, in order that these be primarily and flexibly applied towards the purchase of needed equipment and collection items. The treatment of procurement of items by the National Museum for its collection, such as works of art and archaeological artifacts, as a unique and special case to be governed by prescribed procedures, as existing procurement laws, rules, regulations do not provide an adequate framework for this specific purpose. Explicit authorization to engage in commercial operations appropriate to a museum institution for purposes of revenue generation and enhance services to visitors and the general public, such as the rental of dedicated event and function spaces, the lease of dedicated areas for the erection and operation of commercial establishments, including vehicular parking and production and/or licensing of official merchandise. The establishment of tax incentives for donations of items to the National Museum for its collections in order to facilitate and encourage more numerous donations, particularly of items that are considered to be of national significance and those considered as important cultural properties and/or national cultural treasures under existing laws, and the transfer of all regulatory functions to the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and from there to the future Department of Culture, to enable the National Museum to focus exclusively on its operations and services as a premier museum institution and repository of the country, and to improve governance by removing conflicts of interest between the agency's present mandate as both a collecting and regulatory institution. In conclusion, the aim of this bill is to give the National Museum a clearer, updated, and stronger charter to facilitate the fuller realization of its long-standing mandate and potential, which does not even do better justice to the artistic, cultural, and natural heritage and patrimony of the Filipino people throughout the entire country, and of which we can be rightfully proud as a leading museum institution regionally and worldwide. For the aforesaid reasons, I thus enjoin my colleagues of this august chamber to support this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Subiri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, also with the permission of the authors, if I could be made a co-author of this measure, I'd like to put on record that I've been to the National Museum several times recently, and I must say that it has completely reformatted its programs, and it's completely changed. It's a beautiful, beautiful museum, and we congratulate them for making it free to the public, so nobody has an excuse not to see it, whether you're rich or poor. They should be all welcome to see our cultural and historical treasures, Mr. President. So with this act, I'd like to be part of, if it's possible, if it's okay with the sponsors of the said measure as a co-sponsor. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
So there's a request to be made the co-author.
Yes, of course,
Okay,
Mr. President.
So let the record.
I'm sure that Senator Escudero, the chairman of the committee, would also agree to this. Of course, we welcome the support of Senator Subiri.
And with that, Mr. President, I move that we insert into the records the sponsorship speech of Senator Escudero.
So the speech of Senator Escudero is inserted into the records.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the members to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1529 under Committee Report 140.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order Senate Bill 1557 under Committee Report number 155.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1557 under Committee Report 155.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary, please.
An act modifying the salary schedule for civilian government personnel and authorizing the grant of additional benefits for both civilian and military and uniformed personnel.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, be recognized to deliver his sponsorship speech.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation hereby sponsors Senate Bill number 1557 under Committee Report number 155 entitled Salary Standardization Law 4. In 2008, the Senate and the House of Representatives passed Joint Resolution number 4, frequently referred to as Salary Standardization Law 3, urging the President of the Philippines to modify the compensation and position classification system of civilian personnel and the base pay schedule of military and uniformed personnel in the government. This is to respond to the economic needs of our public servants at the time and to provide them with adequate income and incentives in order to improve their quality of life. During the 16th Congress, your committee sponsored a bill before the Senate which was intended to be Salary Standardization Law 4. Said measure proposed the next rounds of salary adjustments, allowances, and benefits, both for civilian employees and military and uniformed personnel, in order to update and upgrade the compensation structure of the government. The said endeavor sought to further encourage excellent performance and productivity and to clearly distinguish differences in levels of responsibility and accountability among government officials and employees. The said bill was approved on third reading, but unfortunately, it was not passed into law. In lieu of the said measure, and in order to heed the clarion call and urgent appeal for much needed increases in salaries of employees in the government, former President Benigno Aquino signed and issued Executive Order number 201 last 19 February 2016. Pursuant to the said EO, the current administration of President Rodrigo Duterte has implemented through executive fiat the latest round of increases in the salaries, additional allowances, bonuses, and other benefits of civilian employees and military and uniformed personnel in government, effective last January 2017. However, despite the implementation of EO number 201, series of 2016, there are those who continue to doubt the constitutionality of the said executive order, particularly in view of the fact that Article 9, Section 5B of the 1987 Constitution clearly states that the Congress shall provide for the standardization of compensation of government officials and employees, including those in government-owned and controlled corporations with original charters. Then taking into account the nature of the responsibilities pertaining to and qualifications required for their positions. In order to once and for all put to rest any lingering doubts regarding the constitutionality of the last two rounds of salary increases and adjustments in allowances and benefits implemented under EO number 201, and to ensure that the same will no longer be recalled, as well as to lay the appropriate legal basis for the next two remaining tranches under the said EO, your committee has decided to come up with this bill, Senate Bill number 1557, in substitution of all pending bills proposing across-the-board increases in the salaries, allowances, and/or benefits of government employees, essentially adopting and mirroring the substantial provisions of EO number 201. Once enacted into law, this bill, which is intended to become Salary Standardization Law 4, will in effect secure the necessary legislative concurrence and/or approval for the four tranches of increases provided in EO number 201. Accordingly, any and all salary increases grant of allowances and increases in benefits as well as bonuses and incentives previously implemented pursuant to EO 201 shall be considered and credited as in compliance with the provisions of this measure. Mr. President, it is also the aim of your committee in pushing for this measure to ensure that the compensation structure of government personnel is comparable with the prevailing rates in the private sector in order to attract and retain competent and committed civil servants. In the proposed bureaucratic structure under this measure, salary grades will be reclassified, with salary grade 1 being the entry level and salary grade 33, the president, being the highest level. The reclassification of salary grades under this measure is based on the competencies, nature of work, and accountability required for each job. Indeed, passing this measure would be a major step in the direction of the government's anti-corruption campaign and would enable the government to attract and retain and maintain a core of competent government workers, including teachers and members of the military and policemen. In this light, I urge our colleagues to support the immediate passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Sponsorships here, no? Sunny? Yeah. Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1557 under Committee Report 155.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of Senate Bill number 1557 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 1462 under Committee Report 101.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is carried.
I move to consider 1462 under Committee Report 101.
Senate Bill number 1462 is here, is in order.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act providing for special financial assistance and benefits granted to beneficiaries of uniformed and law enforcement personnel of the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, Philippine Coast Guard, National Bureau of Investigation, Bureau of Corrections, and Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty or by reason of their office or position, appropriating funds therefore, repealing for the purpose pertinent provisions of Republic Act number 6963 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganizations, and Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, be recognized to deliver his sponsorship speech, and thereafter, Senator Angara will likewise co-sponsor.
Senator Antonio Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Civil Service, Government Organization, and Professional Regulation hereby sponsors Senate Bill number 1462 under Committee Report number 101, otherwise known as Uniformed and Law Enforcement Personnel Special Financial Assistance Act. The members of the PNP and the AFP and other uniformed and law enforcement personnel are our vanguards in maintaining the country's peace and order, facing in the daily performance of their duties grave and mortal dangers that and imminent threats to their lives in order to safeguard the lives and liberties of all Filipinos. In the course of the performance of their duties, it is inevitable that some of them are forced to commit the ultimate sacrifice of giving up their lives in the service of our country, if not suffer grave injury or permanent disability. Needless to state, such unfortunate incidents usually result to a situation where their own families are forced to further suffer and bear the consequences of the ultimate sacrifice of our uniformed and law enforcement personnel. This is because said families are deprived of financial stability previously provided by the deceased, injured, or disabled uniformed or law enforcement personnel. Worse, in some cases, they are compelled to spend the family's meager resources for the medical needs and related expenses of the concerned personnel. In 1990, Republic Act Number 6963 was enacted to grant special financial assistance and benefits to the family or beneficiary of any police, military personnel, or fireman killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty. However, the benefits under this law were limited to the members of the PNP, AFP, and BFP. Also, said law does not cover personnel from other law enforcement agencies such as the BJMP, the Philippine Coast Guard, NBI, Bucor, and PIDEA, which also have relevant roles in the country's law enforcement and peace and order establishment. There is no doubt that the lives and well-being of said personnel are also at risk in the performance of their duties, especially in light of the anti-drug and anti-crime campaign of the current administration and the ongoing conflict in Marawi and other parts of Mindanao. Thus, there is an imperative for us to expand the scope of the existing law to cover all uniformed and law enforcement personnel facing similar dangers in the performance of their duties. Under this proposed measure, the family or beneficiaries of the aforementioned uniformed and law enforcement personnel shall receive a special financial assistance, an additional benefit on top of the other compensation, donation, insurance, gift, pension, grant, or any form of benefit they may receive or be entitled to in case of their death or permanent injury, disability, or incapacity while in the performance of his or her duties. The grant of the benefit is subject to a single qualification, particularly that the concerned personnel has not been convicted by final judgment of any crime or human rights violations. The special financial assistance shall be equivalent to the 6 months of the average monthly salary, including allowances and bonuses during the last 12 months preceding the death or permanent disability or incapacity of the concerned personnel. There would be no need for any appropriation act or ordinance in order to fund expenses involved in this measure. This is because the funding would come from the previously budgeted and expected salaries, allowances, and or bonuses of the deceased or permanently incapacitated personnel for the next 6 months subsequent to his or her death or permanent injury or incapacity. This special financial benefit shall be exempt from taxes of any kind and should be delivered within 3 days to the concerned personnel or his family or beneficiaries reckoned from the receipt of the written certification of death, permanent disability, and or incapacity of the said personnel by the concerned agency. The position held by the deceased, permanently injured, or incapacitated personnel shall not be filled for a period of 6 months. However, in cases of emergencies, when the position left by the subject personnel needs to be filled immediately, the funds for the position shall come from the emergency savings of the municipality, city, or province, or the department to which he is assigned. In the event of such emergency and no emergency savings are available, the provincial or regional chief, as the case may be, may draw augmentation personnel from any municipality in the province or region to fill up the vacancy with regular personnel. In addition to the foregoing, in the event that a uniformed and law enforcement personnel suffers any injury in the performance of their duties, the hospitalization expenses, including costs of necessary medicine and medical equipment, shall be shouldered by the office or agency to which he or she belongs. The expense shall be chargeable against the savings of such office without the need for any appropriation act or ordinance. The surviving spouse or designated beneficiary of a deceased or permanently incapacitated personnel shall also be given priority in employment in all government agencies and or offices as long as the beneficiary satisfies the minimum qualification requirements for the vacant position. If the spouse is already employed or failed to meet such requirements, or if he or she waives employment privileges, an employable dependent of the concerned personnel may avail of the said privilege. This measure seeks to create a dependents' welfare office in each of the aforementioned concerned agencies to prevent redundancy and to expedite the delivery of benefits. The establishment of such office may be done by appointing an existing office, bureau, or division to concurrently perform the functions necessary for the proper implementation of the provisions of this Act. Mr. President, it is your committee's hope that through this bill, we will be able to uplift the plight and improve the welfare of the families of our deceased and or permanently incapacitated uniformed and law enforcement personnel, and assure them that the government is willing to continue to look after them and their families. It is the least that we can do to honor their courage, loyalty, and sacrifice in the performance of their duties and in the service of our country. In view of the foregoing, I hope that our colleagues will support the immediate passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to recognize Senator Sani Angara to co-sponsor the measure, Mr. President.
Senator Sani Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Thank you to our good-looking presiding officer. Salamat po. I'd like to join our distinguished sponsor, the Chairman of the Committee on Civil Service and Professional Responsibility, Senator Trillanes, also the BFF of the Customs Commissioner. In shepherding, I'd like to congratulate him for shepherding some very vital measures, granting financial and educational assistance to families and other surviving dependents of law enforcement and uniformed personnel who were killed in action or permanently incapacitated while on official duty. Ito pong nakaraang taon, naging saksi po tayong lahat sa lakas ng loob ng mga kapulisan at kasundaluhan para puksain ang kriminalidad at terorismo na nagbabanta sa mapayapang pagtakbo ng ating lipunan. Mr. President, hindi man natin nababalitaan, pati po ang mga taga-PIDEA, Bucor, BJMP, NBI at Philippine Coast Guard or PCG ay sumasabak din po sa panganib para sa kapakanan ng bansa. Malalim po ang pasasalamat ng taong bayan para sa proteksyon na kanilang ibinabahagi. Minsan nga, para maisakatuparan ng kaayusan at kalayaan ng lahat, buhay nila ang kanilang inaalay o sinasakripisyo. Mr. President, no amount can compensate for the loss of life or limb, but while under Republic Act 6963, we already afford special financial assistance to some of those who died or who were permanently incapacitated. Not all of our uniformed personnel who risk their lives for our country's sake receive such assistance. Dati, mga sundalo, pulis at bumbero lamang ang nakakatanggap ng ganitong ayuda. Ngunit lumawak na po ang pangangailangan. Mas dumami ang pinagmumulan ng peligro at hindi lamang taga PNP, AFP o BFP ang sumusugod sa panganib para sa kapakanan ng ating bansa. That is why, Mr. President, we should broaden the coverage of the special financial assistance to include all our law enforcement agencies. Reklamo naman po ng ilang pamilya ang mabagal na pagbigay ng benepisyo sa kanila ay naaayon sa RA 6963. Kaya bahagi po ng panukala ang paglikha ng Dependents Welfare Office sa bawat ahensyang sakop ng batas. Tungkulin nitong tutukan, pabilisin at siguraduhin ang pagbigay ng benepisyo sa mga naulilang mga pamilya. Sumusuporta rin po tayo sa panukala na may matatanggap na educational assistance o kaya scholarship ang mga dependent na mga namatay o na-incapacitate na kawani ng AFP, PNP, BFP, Bucor, BJMP, PIDEA, NBI at Philippine Coast Guard. Ibig sabihin, para sa kanilang serbisyo sa bansa, sagot ng gobyerno ang kinabukasan ng kanilang mga pamilya. Mr. President, we filed this measure recognizing that many of our uniformed personnel are their families' breadwinners. Marahil nawawala sa ating isipan na sa ilalim ng kanilang mga uniforme, sila po ay mga ama, mga ina, mga asawa o anak na may pananagutan sa kanilang mga pamilya at mga mahal sa buhay. Huwag natin kalimutan na tuwing sila'y sumasabak sa peligro, may mga pamilyang nag-aantay sa kanila. Pinagdadasal na sila'y manatiling buhay at ligtas, Ginoong Presidente. Ang mga pamilyang yon ang pumapasan ng bigat kapag napatay o nabaldado habang naka-duty ang ating mga uniformadong kawani. Kaya nararapat po na handang saluhin ng gobyerno ang mga pamilyang ito. Nararapat lamang na pinoprotekta sila habang nasa panganib ang kanilang mga minamahal na nagproprotekta sa bansa. Marahil yan po ang pinakamataas na pagpupugay at pagsasaludo sa sakripisyo ng ating mga uniformadong kawani. Nandun nga sa ating pambansang awit, ang linyang ang mamatay ng dahil sa iyo. Hindi naman po sa ninanais natin na may namamatay habang ipinagtatanggol ang ating bansa. Ayaw po natin yon. Pero para sa mga matatapang na Pilipino na handang ialay ang kanilang buhay para sa Pilipinas, siguraduhin sana natin na handa tayong saluhin sila at ang kanilang mahal sa buhay. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1462 under Committee Report 101.
Is there any objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 1462 under Committee Report number 101 is hereby suspended.
With the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 1463 under Committee Report 102.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is hereby carried.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1463 under Committee Report 102.
Is there any objection? Consideration of Committee Report 1463 is hereby in order.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act granting educational assistance and benefits to the dependents of all members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine National Police, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, National Bureau of Investigation, Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, Philippine Coast Guard, and Bureau of Corrections who are killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty or by reason of their office or position.
Ito pala yung kanya.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Organization, and Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, be recognized to deliver his sponsorship speech.
Senator Antonio Trillanes is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Civil Service, Government Organization, and Professional Regulation hereby sponsors Senate Bill number 1463 under Committee Report number 102, otherwise known as Uniformed and Law Enforcement Personnel Educational Assistance and Benefits Act of 2017. Similar to Senate Bill number 1462, this measure seeks to provide support through scholarship grants and educational benefits and assistance to the dependents of our uniformed and law enforcement personnel who are killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duties. Mr. President, every day, our uniformed personnel are faced with mortal dangers in the performance of their duties. As they say, our uniformed and law enforcement personnel place their lives on the line every day. That is, every time they step out of their homes to fulfill their duties so that the rest of us can live more peacefully and sleep soundly at night. In short, they are constantly at risk of getting killed or injured in the line of duty. Considering the circumstances, it is only fair for the state to give preference and priority to the welfare of the families of these personnel. Indeed, it is of paramount importance that we assure our uniformed personnel that the needs of their families will be properly provided for in the event that something unfortunate happens to them. In the past years, the legislature has enacted various measures that seek to provide additional benefits to the dependents of our uniformed personnel. However, some of these measures covered only our uniformed personnel and may have unintentionally overlooked members of the other law enforcement agencies who also face the same or similar risks to which our uniformed personnel are exposed to. Furthermore, these laws providing benefits for the dependents in the case of our uniformed personnel, limit the assistance in the case of educational assistance to only one dependent, which is far from being fair and ideal. Under this proposed measure, your committee seeks to provide scholarships, educational assistance, and benefits to the surviving children of the members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, PNP, BFP, BJMP, NBI, PDEA, PCG, and Bucor who are killed or permanently incapacitated in the line of duty. All the surviving children of the concerned personnel shall automatically and without qualification be granted full scholarship from kindergarten to tertiary level, whether in the form of a baccalaureate degree, formal or non-formal education or training program in a non-exclusive school or institution. The surviving spouse of the concerned personnel may also avail of the said scholarship if he or she so desires. In case the deceased or disabled personnel is single, his or her qualified dependent siblings may avail of said benefits. The subject scholarship shall include, but shall not be limited to, the payment of tuition, miscellaneous fees, allowance for books, school supplies, food and transportation. The amounts necessary to fund the scholarships, educational assistance, and benefits shall be separately sourced and utilized as follows. For PNP, from the license fees collected from the PNP Firearms and Explosive Office. For the AFP, from prevailing funds exclusively allocated for scholarships, including applicable grants and donations from other service income. For BFP, from subsidy income from the national government. For PCG, from collection from permits and licenses, fees and penalties, service income, and other general income. And for NBI, income from government services, particularly from new clearance fees and other miscellaneous income. For PDEA, BJMP, and Bucor, the required funds shall be included in their respective budgets under the General Appropriations Act. The concerned agencies may determine or generate additional sources of funds for the continuity of their scholarship assistance program. Under this act, a uniformed and law enforcement personnel scholarship board will be created. The board shall serve as the policy-making body vested with the authority to come up with the mechanics, scope, and limitations and requirements for the scholarships, assistance, and benefits provided under this act. It shall be composed of the Secretary of Interior and Local Government, Secretary of Justice, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of National Defense, other alternatives as co-chairman, and one member each to represent the AFP, PNP, BFP, BJMP, NBI, PDEA, PCG, and Bucor. If the agency concerned does not have an existing scholarship board or body, the head of agency is authorized to create such board or to delegate its function to an existing bureau, division, or office which could concurrently perform such functions. The board and the respective boards or bodies of the concerned agencies shall have the authority to accept donations, contributions, and cash grants from appropriate sources here or abroad. Said donations shall be used exclusively to complement the funding requirements of the scholarship programs of each concerned agency. The donations or financial aid shall be exempt from taxes of any kind and shall constitute allowable deductions in full from the income of the donors for income tax purposes. Moreover, the board and the respective boards or bodies of the concerned agencies are authorized to invest so much of the idle funds as may be necessary to generate additional revenues for the benefit of the scholarship program. In case of a shortfall in the amount necessary to fund the scholarships, educational assistance, and benefits, the funding necessary shall be included in the respective annual budgets of the agencies concerned to be enacted as part of the annual General Appropriations Act. Deficiencies in the financial requirements may likewise be taken from the savings on the personal services of the concerned agencies and the miscellaneous personal benefits fund. The board may also identify or generate additional sources of funds to further support the scholarship program. Mr. President, there is no doubt that it is the state's duty to look after the welfare of our uniformed and law enforcement personnel and their families, particularly in case of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice of giving up their lives in the service of our country. Passing this measure is the least we can do as a token of our eternal gratitude for their unwavering commitment and their life of service to the country. In view of the foregoing, I hope that our colleagues will support the immediate passage of the measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1463. I'm joking, Mr. President, because I'm the principal author of the measure. I move to suspend consideration to allow the members to study the proposed measure. Senate Bill 1463, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 1463 under Committee Report number 102 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1390 under Committee Report 52.
Consideration of Senate Bill number 1390 under Committee Report number 52 is in order.
This is the measure on strengthening the Philippine policy on HIV. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So, may I move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and to interpellate the Majority Leader, Mr. President, and thereafter Senator Manny Pacquiao for today.
Senator Risa Ontiveros is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And to interpellate, our Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished lady from Akbayan continue to answer questions for our enlightenment on the proposed measure, Mr. President?
Gladly, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, during the previous interpellations, last May 24, 2017, the sponsor promised to provide this representation with the data as to the profession and educational attainment of persons with HIV, AIDS in the country. Can I be apprised of the same now, Mr. President? Are we ready with this?
Mr. President, 1/4 of persons living with HIV and persons living with HIV in the Philippines currently today are unemployed, and 3/4 are working people employed in different sectors of our economy.
We asked for their profession and educational statement, if you will recall, Mr. President. Are we ready with that now, or shall we wait for another time?
And then yung educational thing.
If you're not ready with it now, it's all right. We have other times to
Yes,
take it
thank
up,
you
judges.
for that, Mr. President. I'm partially ready, and I can provide further or more detailed data in
All
the
right.
succeeding hearings. For example, Mr. President, apparently the data for the specific breakdown of by profession of the 75% of persons living with HIV in the Philippines who are employed is not so easily available because of the apprehension about stigma and discrimination against these persons in their specific sectors of employment. As for, Mr. President, the data on the educational attainment, as for the educational attainment of persons living with HIV in the Philippines, they would be broken down into 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, or 25% having had no educational attainment, 25% having completed at least elementary schooling, another 25% secondary schooling, and the last 25% tertiary schooling. So, persons living with HIV or Filipinos living with HIV would cover the whole range of educational
But when you say
attainment or lack of it.
25%, or you are speaking of ballpark figures. No, we don't really have the exact numbers. You do not have the exact numbers? Or the exact educational attainment?
Yes, Mr. President, I will be giving that to you shortly.
Please, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
All right.
President.
Now also, I can still clearly remember that I suspended my interpellation last time while the sponsor was discussing the reasons for, or the reasons why RA 8504, otherwise known as the Philippine AIDS Prevention and Control Act of 1998, which we passed in the 11th Congress, which this measure seeks to repeal, has not been effective. That is one of the reasons I asked why we are repealing it. No, now I suspended it because, according to the sponsor, I will refresh the memory of our colleagues. One of the factors that affected the effective implementation of the said law, the old law, if we can call it that, is the belated introduction, according to you, of health strategy, which is the harm reduction scheme, a strategy that, quote, has been supported by the Dangerous Drugs Board. Furthermore, the sponsor stated that, Mr. President, and I quote, DDB agreed that harm reduction is a part of the health response or the overall health strategy to stop HIV transmission even among persons who inject drugs. Now, Mr. President, I have here the official statement of the Dangerous Drugs Board relative to this matter that was released and published by the agency on May 31st, 2017. Now, please allow me to read the same. I printed it directly from the DDB's website. Statement of the Dangerous Drugs Board on the supposed adoption of harm reduction measures. The Dangerous Drugs Board would like to reiterate that what the government implements to address the country's drug problem is a comprehensive five-pillar strategy composed of drug supply reduction, drug demand reduction, alternative development, civic awareness and response, and regional and international cooperation. Harm reduction policies, programs, and practices have not been adopted, as some of the components of this approach are in conflict with the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, or Republic Act 9165. Needle and syringe exchange program, for instance, cannot be implemented in the country as the law prohibits the possession of equipment, instrument, apparatus, and other drug paraphernalia for dangerous drugs. Moreover, drug substitution is not an applicable program as opiates are not a major drug of abuse in the country. Our efforts are focused on raising awareness on the evils of drugs through the preventive education, empowering people to protect themselves from its harms through capacity building programs, and bringing back as productive citizens those who have fallen prey to drug abuse through treatment and rehabilitation. Now, the statement that I have just read, Mr. President, clearly shows that the Dangerous Drugs Board has never agreed nor adopted any harm reduction scheme in its fight against illegal drugs. And I distinctly recall, Mr. President, that when I was Dangerous Drugs Board chairman, I debated on this lengthily in Vienna, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Conference, and we practically won the debate because the United States and Russia, during that time, the representatives supported my stand that the United Nations should not adopt the harm reduction program that was being proposed then by Switzerland and the Netherlands. It has never been adopted by the UNODC. That's why I'm so sure that the Dangerous Drugs Board will not do so. Now, how can the DDB now support the said harm reduction scheme as part of the health response among persons who inject drugs if they haven't tried the method before nor subscribe to it? Now, will the distinguished lady stand by the statement it's made earlier, or will support the DDB released statement that I just read?
Thank you, Mr. President. Before getting to the specific question about harm reduction and the Dangerous Drugs Board's position on harm reduction, just in response to the good gentleman's earlier question about why there was a need to amend or to repeal the old law and to provide for a new law, may I just say that the part of the rationale for amending a Philippine AIDS Prevention and Control Act of 1998 is that the number of Filipinos with HIV, and which is the focus of this bill, Mr. President, not the Dangerous Drugs Act, though it is an important related law, but the focus is on our response to the HIV and AIDS crisis. The number of Filipinos with HIV will be around 160,000 by year 2022, or end of administration, and more than 500,000 by 2030 if we continue with the business as usual attitude and do nothing new. The recent joint UN program on HIV/AIDS released a report which revealed that the Philippines is now #1 in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of rate of increase in the number of HIV cases, which is why also, Mr. President, I recently called on the government to declare a national emergency in the case of HIV and AIDS. And if we look, Mr. President, at the incidence or the modes of transmission of HIV, they are highest, first of all, among men having sex with men. Second, the highest in intimate relations between men and women. And third highest among people who are already infected with HIV or are vulnerable to infection by HIV and who either use or inject drugs. So now, Mr. President, going to the specific issue about harm reduction. As I also mentioned in our earlier interpellation with the good gentleman, harm reduction refers to evidence-based policies, programs, and approaches that aim to reduce transmission of HIV and its harmful consequences on health, social relations, and economic conditions. Harm reduction is also relevant, or particularly relevant, for people who use and inject drugs who are at risk for HIV/AIDS transmission. Contracting HIV from sharing of infected needles is a significant mode of transmission and accounts for 4.2% of known HIV cases, or it is the third highest mode of transmission for HIV cases. And as the good gentleman himself mentioned earlier, harm reduction, and also in this specific instance of persons living with HIV, harm reduction refers to reducing the harms that accrue to them and reducing the probability that they will, if still healthy, contract HIV, or that they will infect others with HIV because of that use of needles in the case of persons who inject drugs. So now to the very specific issue of the position of the Dangerous Drugs Board on harm reduction. Mr. President, during the committee hearing for this HIV/AIDS bill last November 29, 2016, the representative of the Dangerous Drugs Board mentioned the instance where the DDB issued a board resolution providing harm reduction. He also said in the hearing that harm reduction does not contradict prevention and are complementary anyway. Again, Mr. President, specifically in this situation of persons living with HIV or who may infect others with HIV, when they are also people who use or inject drugs. I understand, Mr. President, that as the good gentleman read, that the DDB is now of the opinion, as reflected in the letter, is now of the opinion that some components of this approach are in conflict with Republic Act 9165. Some components, Mr. President, because harm reduction itself, even in the PNAC or the Philippine National AIDS Council statement refers to a spectrum of services, not just needle and syringe programs. I acknowledge, Mr. President, that this shift in policy of the DDB is understandable considering the change in leadership in the board. But I would like to point out here that at one point in time, therefore not never, Mr. President, but that at one point in time, the administrators and the technical experts inside this agency recognized the value of harm reduction as a strategy that is complementary to prevention, Mr. President. And additionally, Mr. President, good gentlemen, yes, to quote from the mentioned PNAC resolution of the Philippine National AIDS Council Secretariat this year, entitled Philippine National AIDS Council Position on Harm Reduction, one of their whereases reads, harm reduction, or the comprehensive package of intervention for people who inject drugs, include the following activities and services: community outreach and peer education activities for the targeted population groups, peer education and counseling, condom promotion and distribution, continuous provision of sexually transmitted infections diagnosis and treatment, clinic-based outreach, continuous provision of voluntary counseling and testing, and or provider-initiated counseling and testing, psychosocial and spiritual intervention, and treatment, care, and support for HIV-positive injecting drug users. So just to demonstrate very concretely, Mr. President, the wide range of activities and services included in harm reduction as recognized by the PNAC and as recognized in one recent instance, even by the Dangerous Drugs Board, Mr. President.
Just on that last particular issue that you raised, which is the PNAC, their programs or policy that you have just mentioned, they didn't mention anything about raising morality or moral values of Filipinos.
Actually, Mr. President,
It's
I
just
mentioned
about condoms and all that.
It includes condom promotion and distribution. It includes diagnosis and treatment, clinic-based outreach, counseling and testing, treatment, care, and support for HIV-positive injecting drug users. And, as I mentioned, Mr. President, in my enumeration, it includes, number 9, psychosocial and spiritual intervention, Mr. President.
Yes, because it's an advisory council. We were expecting that there should be very strong positions on moral values. Anyway,
Yes,
let
Mr.
me,
President, the
going back
PNAC
to
has
the
not
issue
failed
of
us on
harm
that.
reduction, no? That's the PNIC. Well, I'll go there to the PNIC later, the PNAC later. Let me move forward first, then I'll go back to my questions. Let me concentrate on that particular issue that you mentioned. You were defining, or you were more or less giving us a perspective of the harm reduction strategy that you would want to infuse in this bill. You said it is not only confined to syringes and distribution of syringes and all that stuff. There are more issues on harm reduction.
Yes, Mr.
O
President.
di, alisin natin.
Actually, Mr. President,
Because, let me say why.
yes,
okay?
Mr. President.
Alisin natin because the Article 3, Section 23, Paragraph 2 on harm reduction strategies, which states, quote, the presence of used or unused condoms, other safer sex paraphernalia, and sterile injecting equipment. Ay, alam na natin kung ano yung sterile injecting equipment. Shall not be used as basis to conduct raids or similar police operations in sites and venues of HIV prevention interventions. Now, ito, tuloy ko lang. The DILG and DOH, in coordination with the DDB, shall establish a national policy to guarantee the implementation of this provision. Mr. President, the question begs to be answered is, that begs to be done, is there a need to establish a national policy regarding this when in fact it is one of the functions of the judiciary, a co-equal branch of government, through their courts, judges, to determine probable cause for the issuance of search warrants for the conduct of raids or police operations. So, parang sasabihin natin dito ngayon na hindi pwede pag may mga ganitong equipment dahil baka ginagamit ito sa HIV prevention program. Now, just let us say a hypothetical case. What if these syringes are being illegally used to inject drugs by these claiming to be undergoing HIV prevention intervention? Can't our judiciary now, or can't the judge now, issue a search warrant to the place where the alleged HIV patients undergoing prevention intervention are located in the basis of the presence of the said syringes, as it violates Section 23 of your proposed measures? Yung hindi sila pwede. Di ba? Ganun po ba yan?
So, Mr. President, to the two issues raised by the good gentleman, first of all, there is no section or provision in this proposed HIV/AIDS law that includes or even mentions needles and syringe programs. So if the good gentleman will again examine the text of the proposed bill, there is nothing on needle and syringe promotion, nothing on setting up of a disposable protocol for used needles and syringes.
Yeah, will you please look at Section 23, or am I looking at a different bill? Line 12.
Mr. President, to reiterate
Sterile injecting equipment. Ano ito? Kung hindi syringe ito. You said there's no mention. There is.
Mr. President, to reiterate my first statement to the first issue raised by the good gentleman in this question, there is no line, even in Section 23, on harm reduction strategies that includes as one of the services to be extended, needle and syringe promotion or setting up of a disposable protocol for used needles and syringes. And the bill adheres to the spirit of the PNAC statement on harm reduction, which enumerates all other harm reduction activities and services, not including needle and syringe promotion or setting up of a disposable protocol for used needles and syringes. One practical implication of that, Mr. President, would be that there would be budget allocation to the Department of Health for various strategies, including harm reduction, but not including needle and syringe services through the Department of Health. The second point that is raised by the good gentleman in his question is in the second paragraph of the harm reduction strategies. It does not refer to the harm reduction services that would be extended by the Department of Health using public funds to persons living with HIV who are using or injecting drugs. This simply refers to the non-use of those condoms, safer sex paraphernalia, and yes, sterile injecting equipment as a basis to conduct raids or similar police operations. So this refers, Mr. President, to this refers to Section 23, not promoting drug use criminalization or possession of syringes for HIV response. So syringes are used to deliver medicines. They are not contemplated to be used in the rehabilitation and treatment programs for persons living with HIV who are also using or injecting drugs. We could therefore contemplate, Mr. President, possibilities of treatment and rehabilitation programs through health bodies, not the Department of Health, which are leading persons, first of all, infected with HIV, but secondly, who are also using or injecting drugs down the path of treatment and rehabilitation. So this is, these are some of the settings contemplated by this second paragraph. But the first paragraph, I want to make very clear its intent is to extend or to use harm reduction strategies, but in consonance with the PNAC statement, harm reduction strategies not including needle and syringe services, Mr. President.
Mr. President, that is your perspective. That is your intent. This is going to be abused. I agree, I assure you. Your paragraph will be abused by drug users and drug abusers. We should not allow such things in laws that we are proposing. We're very hard. We should be very hard on the issue of illegal drugs. Pero to garantisado, the way it is worded, Mr. President, I assure you, it will be abused.
Mr. President,
Nasabihan na kagad natin dito not be used as basis to conduct raids or similar police operations inside to venues of HIV prevention intervention. Kung alam ko yun, ako'y gagamit ng droga, doon ako pupunta sa HIV intervention. Hindi pwedeng raidin ng pulis Ala na. Pinabayaan na natin. Imbis na sabihin natin, tumigil kayo, mag-rehab kayo, hindi, bibigyan pa natin ng pagkakataon na para safe against HIV. Sa HIV naman, imbis na sabihin natin, huwag na kayong makipag-sex sa hindi tama. Stay with one partner. Taas natin ang moralidad. Having sex with men, ito ang diferensya. Doon tayo mag-concentrate. Yun ang pinakamalaking problema sa lahat. Hindi ba? Imbis na ganon, bibigyan natin ng ganitong klaseng opening. This is very dangerous, Mr. President. Now,
Mr. President, if I may, at this point in time, before I lose my train of thought of what the good gentleman is saying, precisely such settings referred to in paragraph 2 are treatment and rehabilitation settings. That's what I want to clarify. Secondly, the last line of the second paragraph says, the DILG, which happens to be the department with operational control over the Philippine National Police, the DILG and DOH, in coordination with the Dangerous Drugs Board, which has that new policy on harm reduction that the good gentleman and I talked about, the DILG, DOH, in coordination with DDB, shall establish a national policy to guarantee the implementation
of this provision. Which says there is no basis, you should not be used to a basis to conduct raids or similar police operations.
The spirit
that is what you're saying here.
The spirit, the intent, Mr. President, and I will get to the intent immediately after this sentence in order to address the concern of the good gentleman about confusion about this Section 23.
No, not confusion, abuse.
Yes, the gentleman said confusion or possible abuse of this provision. The intent of this Section 23, including the second paragraph, is to address the health needs of persons living with HIV and the health needs of persons who use or inject drugs who are being led down the path of treatment and rehabilitation. So, in order to address even more directly the good gentleman's concern about possible abuse at the proper time, I am open to a proposed amendment to clarify Section 23, Mr. President.
All right, thank you very much.
And in any case, Mr. President, courts can always look at the evidence presented for violations of the Dangerous Drugs Act, Mr. President.
All right. Tsaka, Mr. President, kasi, you know, to let you know where I'm coming from, sa haba ng debate namin nung araw dito, from 2008 to 2010, and even in Vienna, alam kong ang strategy nila Hindi naman yung strategy ninyo. I know that is your intent, your perspective. I said, well and good. But that's not the strategy of those who are proposing harm reduction strategy program from abroad Kaya talagang tama yung sabi nyo, there will be no public funds. Why? Kasi pinamimigay nila Sila nag-i-sponsor Sila namimigay, ginagamit nila yan. Inumpisahan nila sa UN Inumpisahan nila sa Europe yan Ngayon, Tapos ito is namimigay sila ng mga syringes para yung mga nagtasaksak ng heroin hindi magkakahawahan. Binibigyan nila ng bago, laging bagong syringe. Ang laki nga ng gastos noon. And one of the statements that I told them when I was there was that when you have so much money to buy syringes to give to your drug addicts, I said, there are very many poor countries in the world. One of these countries is my country, the Philippines. Just give us the money so we can use it for better purposes instead of buying syringes. Anyway, kaya ganun po ang tating ko rito. Pag narinig ko yung harm reduction strategy, naka-red alert kagad ako. Sapagkat alam ko na ibang intensyon nung mga nag-introduce niyan at nagtutulak niyan. Kaya hindi ako, talagang walang public funds tayong gagamitin dyan. Dahil lang gagaling sa kanila yung pondo. Anyway,
Actually, Mr. President, if I may just make a last point on this matter, such needle and syringe programs in other countries, and which we are not contemplating to fund through this bill, they use as a very deliberate health intervention, precisely to prevent the spread of HIV through infected needles, which in our country already accounts for the third highest mode of transmission. So, and then just to reiterate, Mr. President, that at the proper time, in order to clarify the Section 23, I will be open to receive proposed amendments, Mr. President.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. President. We will be preparing our proposed amendment for that particular paragraph or section. I just can't help but, just placing on record kasi it's a very good excuse always. Health, when it comes to drug abuse, it's a very good excuse. Even now, those who are proposing the legalization of marijuana uses it as a very good excuse. Medical marijuana daw. Just call it cannabis oil if it works for you. But don't say it's medical marijuana, because once you do that, you are going to allow the entire marijuana system into the Philippines and it will be legalized. Patay na tayo sa mga magtatanim niyan at saka mag-ano niyan. And mabigat nun, pag nakapag-umpisa na sila rito at ang malalaking organisasyon ang humawak niyan, katulad na nangyayari sa Mexico, wala sa kalingkingan yung drug war ni President Duterte. I assure you that.
Mr. President, that's another very interesting discussion about the medical use of marijuana. But just talking about this one, HIV, never, especially in such a disease that I've called on the government to declare a national emergency about it, because we are already #1 in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of rate of increase in the number of HIV cases. Never is this used as an excuse for anything else than saving lives, preventing infection, improving the quality of life of persons living with HIV, whether they are using or injecting drugs or not.
No, Mr. President.
And
I don't think we're on the same.
Preventing stigma and discrimination.
I don't think we're on the same page. I have nothing against policy against HIV and AIDS. I am very supportive.
Thank you,
Red
Mr.
alert lang ako, mataas ang antena ko. Oras na yung mga tukol na sa droga ang pinapasok nila. At nagagamit yung katulad niyang HIV proposals. I'm very supportive of this, pero let's clean it up. Wala natin halalagyan, hayaang mapasukan ito na mga abuso ng iba. Diba? That's why I'm saying we're not on the same page. I have no problem with the issue of HIV or whether we are #1, #2, or whatever it is, even if we're number 100, let us support the prevention of HIV, the spread of HIV, and Mr. President. I'm for that, definitely. It has nothing to do with the issue that I'm raising. The issue that I'm raising is all towards the issue of dangerous drugs, illegal drugs, drug abuse, and drug trafficking. Anyway, Mr. President, I would like to proceed with the set of questions that I wasn't able to ask during the last time, because I awaited the data that I was asking for. So now, Mr. President, the distinguished sponsor said that Republic Act 8504 has not been effective. Hence, its intended repeal by this bill, no? So what are the safeguards included in the proposed measure that shall ensure its effective implementation? Dahil hindi naging effective yung dating bill.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I was gathering the data about the educational attainment. Could the good gentleman please repeat the question?
Yes. You intend to repeal 8504, and the last time we discussed this, you said because it has not been effective. Now, what are the safeguards now included in your measure now that shall ensure its effective implementation?
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1390, 6 yes, 6 to repeal RA 8504 and introduce a legal framework that incorporates lessons from the current HIV response and introduces newer evidence-based, human rights-informed, and gender-inclusive strategies to prevent and treat the epidemic. It has 7 aims, which are features of the proposed measure that will seek to address the issues or the situation of the disease in our country today, which we have not been able to under the old law. It seeks to reform the Philippine National AIDS Council, or PNAC, as the main governance platform for the HIV response to guarantee efficiency and alignment with evidence-based approaches to address the HIV epidemic, to establish a national HIV program with clear mechanisms for operationalization and implementation at the local level, introduce evidence-based, human rights-informed, and gender-inclusive HIV prevention and treatment approaches. Fourth, improve access to HIV services, especially for key populations and vulnerable communities, and ensure social and financial risk protection for those who need to access these services. Fifth, enhance anti-discrimination protection to promote the human rights of Filipinos living with HIV, key populations and vulnerable communities, and providers of HIV services. Sixth, promote a more collaborative framework for the HIV response, especially to guarantee the meaningful participation and involvement of civil society, communities, and key populations, and guarantee sufficient investment for the HIV response, Mr. President. And Mr. President,
yes.
Sir, if I may just add, an additional rationale for a new law is also historical. ARV, or antiretroviral treatment against HIV, started in our country only in year 2005. So only in 2005 did we have a more complete response of test and treat. So we need to capture those lessons from a dozen years ago and reflect them in a new law, Mr. President.
Because some of us who supported the old, sorry, the old law, the 1998, we feel that this is a good law. As a matter of fact, what you have been reading, what you just read, was substantially the same, similar with the existing 8504. So, what is the reason for the intended repeal? Why not amend? Why not amend a good law? Parang yung ease of doing business yan eh. Hindi, di ba, yung law.
Anti-red tape.
Anti-red tape law eh. Baka naman amendment ang mas bagay, or to modify the law instead of repealing a good law. Well, those of us in the 11th Congress who passed this bill, that it's a good law.
Mr. President, the law was certainly a good law in its time, 1998.
Yeah, but the implementation is the problem, di ba? Yun ang sabi mo. That is what the distinguished lady said. The implementation was not effective. And that is my question. What is it in this new law that will make it effective? The implementation effective, I'm sorry. That will make the implementation effective when substantially ang laman is parang rewarded 8504, Mr. President.
The new element, Mr. President, what will make the implementation of this new law effective is the presence of treatment. 1998, wala pa po tayong treatment. Wala pa po tayong na-extend na ARV treatment sa mga persons diagnosed living with HIV. Ang meron lang po tayo mula 1998 hanggang 2005 ay testing. Pero hanggang 2005, wala pong paggamot. So ngayon po, kaya kailangan ng isang bagong batas dahil it's not a world away, but half a world away sa sitwasyon natin noong una natin ipinasa ang batas 1998. Dahil ngayon, meron na tayong hindi lamang testing na dapat magpatuloy, pero meron na tayong testing and treatment. We have a dozen years worth of experience under that regime na may testing na, may treatment pa. And yet, Mr. President, kahit 12 taon na tayong may ARV treatment, still, we are now the #1 in Asia-Pacific region in terms of rate of increase in the number of HIV cases. Kaya nga po ako nanawagan sa gobyerno mag-declare ng emergency situation sa HIV and AIDS at meron pong ihahain yung mga advocates nitong panawagan ng emergency plan, proposed spending budget para sa susunod na taon at sa mga susunod na taon. Para by end of administration 22, we have stopped the onward creep or march of this epidemic at mas na nagamot at na iligtas natin ang buhay at na itaas yung quality of life, yung kalusugan even of persons living with HIV. And in relation to an earlier point raised by the good gentleman, in fact, as is the case in almost all health spending, yung pisong ginagastos natin para sa prevention, early detection, early treatment of persons living with HIV, for example, including those who use or inject drugs, ay higit na nagdudulot ng, meron po akong data rito, savings in future health spending. Dahil nanip natin in the bud yung paglala ng sakit sa isang individual at pagkalat ng sakit na ito sa ating lipunan, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, kung treatment ang hinahabol natin, why don't we introduce treatment now into the old law? Yeah, ako lang, I'm just trying to save instead of repealing the old law. I'm trying to save the old law. Baka nagbabaling-baling sa nicho si Senator Flavier, Mr. President. And pinaghirapan namin to yun eh.
Ay nako, Mr.
Diba?
President,
So,
certainly.
kung treatment ang hinahabol natin dito for an effective implementation of 8504, di ipasok natin ang treatment.
Certainly, Mr. President, wala po sa ating may nais na pasamain ang loob ni the late great Senator Flavier dahil lalo na't siya po yung gaya sa halimbawa ng lumang batas or kasalukuyang batas, siya nga po yung isang nagsulong ng mga universal healthcare policy framework dito sa ating bansa. Rather, I would imagine that the good Senator Flavier rejoices na kaya nating anihin yung mga leksyon ng kasalukuyang batas which we gave birth to at the time na wala pang treatment. Mr. President, napaka-importanting pagkakaiba iyon. It's like speaking of the world before and after na-discover ang penicillin, or the world before and after na-discover ang mga treatment natin para sa cancer. Kaya hindi natin binabaliwala yung kung ano yung mabuti sa kasalukuyang batas, but because we need to introduce as basis for the policy yung mga leksyon natin sa panahon na wala pa tayong treatment, and we need to introduce the lessons from the past dozen years. Mas mahaba pa kaysa sa 7 taon na itinakbo ng kasalukuyang batas na wala pang treatment. Lessons of the past dozen years na mayroon na tayong testing and treatment pareho, kinakailangan isang bagong batas. Otherwise, if we will be amending practically every section of the current law, we might as well pass a new law, Mr. President, na, of course, i-attribute yung ugat niya dun sa lumang batas, Mr. President.
All right, Mr. President, just to go on with the issue of whether the implementation was effective or not, to further find out if RA 8504 was effective, implemented well or not. In 8504, and I think it's also contained in your proposal, it penalizes the following acts: misinformation on HIV/AIDS prevention control through false and misleading advertising and claims, unsafe practices and procedures, violation of confidentiality, discriminatory acts and policies. These acts are being penalized. Were there any cases filed against any person for violation of the provisions of 8504?
Mr. President, no one was ever charged under the provisions of the current law.
So wala.
Wala po, sir, Mr. President.
Therefore, the implementation release was ineffective.
That's
All right.
partly
Now-
the need, Mr. President, for this new
So
law.
kahit anong ganda ng ipopropose ninyo, pag hindi rin implement, wala rin.
Opo.
Anyway,
As
in
within
the
law,
definition
Mr.
of
President.
terms, in your definition of terms, the word discrimination has been defined as, quote, unfair or unjust treatment that distinguishes, excludes, restricts, or shows preferences based on HIV status, whether actual or perceived. End of quote, among others, Mr. President. What do you mean when you say that HIV status of an individual is perceived?
That means,
Mabigat po yung perceived, ah.
That means, Mr. President, a perception on the part of the offender na HIV positive itong taong ito, kaya't dinidiscriminate niya siya or sinistigmatize niya siya. Yun po yung ibig sabihin ng phrase na yun, Mr. President.
Kung mali yung perception.
Kung mali yung perception, Mr. President,
Perception eh, is-
discriminatory act pa rin po ang ginawa dun sa taong iyon na on the basis of yung HIV status niya, ay i-discriminate nung offender. At yung ito pong definition ng diskriminasyon ay nandun din po sa kasalukuyang batas. So isinama po namin sa panukala.
Yeah. It's in the mind. Di ba? When you say
Discrimination
perceived,
and stigma is always in the mind, yes, Mr. President. Pero yung discriminatory act po ay sinagawa talaga. Hindi lang nasa isip niya, ginawa niya sa tao.
hindi ko masakyan, Mr. President, yung explanation sa atin ng aking our distinguished colleague.
Mr. President, nandun po yun sa kasalukuyang batas na
you
ipinasabi po
define-
ng good gentleman.
Yeah, pero if we are
The phrase whether actual or perceived exists in the existing law?
Yes, Mr.
Oh,
President.
exist in the old law. Oh, hindi ba sabi ko nga kanina, substantially pareho rin eh. Bakit natin i-repeal? Anyway,
Mr.
sige,
President,
well, I'll try to digest that particular use of the word perceived in the issue of discrimination. I would like now to proceed with the topic of the Philippine National AIDS Council. Hindi pala advisory nga, AIDS Council. In the old law,
Mr. President, I'm sorry to interrupt the good gentleman, but I correct myself. There was one case filed under the old law at the National Labor Relations Commission, or NLRC, against Ricky Reyes in 2016. And naipanalo po ito, and the damages awarded were in the amount of 615,313 pesos.
what
and
was the
6
case, Mr.
centavos.
President?
Ang kaso po, Mr. President, ay discrimination and unlawful termination. So, I was about to say swak na swak. Pasok na pasok po dun sa provision.
Dinerminate niya sa trabaho dahil may AIDS.
Tinerminate po sa trabaho dahil sa status as HIV positive, Mr. President.
And what was the penalty, Mr. President?
Ang victim po ay inawardan ng ng NLRC specifically ng 615,313 pesos and 6 centavos.
That's all.
Yes, Mr. President.
All
But
right.
there are, sorry.
Good.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Go ahead, what were you saying?
It's all right, Mr. President.
all right.
The proposal is as in.
So as I said, let's move on to the Philippine National AIDS Council. In the 8504, the Philippine National AIDS Council, or PNAC, is attached to the Department of Health, but not considered as an independent agency. Now, my questions are, what is the reason why 1390 or Senate Bill 1390 proposes that PNAC now be an independent agency? Because in the current organizational structure of the Department of Health, its attached agencies include the Commission on Population, National Nutrition Council, which both cover the majority of the population, if not in its entirety. However, for PNAC, it is a highly specialized council that focuses primarily on the persons living with HIV/AIDS, as well as the key affected populations at higher risk of HIV exposure. Now, which can be said as a smaller number. So, is it not proper to retain PNAC's current status as an attached agency of DOH? Because you even propose that the PNAC be supported by a secretariat. How many personnel do we foresee here? Meron pa lang tayong bill on right sizing. The minority leader will, I'm sure, question this particular point. May we know why we need to make it a detached agency instead, an independent agency?
Mr. President, actually, under the bill, the PNAC remains attached to the Department of Health. The two features of the Philippine National AIDS Council proposed in the bill, which are different from the current law, una po, strengthen participation of civil society organizations at saka streamlined functions of PNAC. So it will remain, Mr. President, an attached agency of the Department of Health. Meron lang siyang sariling line item budget.
So there will be additional personnel appointed as part of the PNAC Secretariat?
There will be additional personnel, Mr. President, also in line of, and this is consistent with yung pagkakaroon niya ng sariling line budget dahil sa kasalukuyan, nakalump together lang siya sa other infectious diseases. Samantalang ang nais po ng mga stakeholders sa PNAC, itampok na precisely this is already at the current time already a national emergency at dapat hindi lang siya parang one of several infectious diseases pero yung isa na kailangan nating mag-intervene and urgently right now. Mr.
So there will
President.
be new positions that will be created
There will
for
be
the
new
execution of
positions.
this measure.
There will be new positions created, Mr. President.
Would be the possible benefits creating new positions outweigh the additional cost for government?
Certainly, Mr. President. I thank the good gentleman for that question because yes, as I was saying earlier, yung bawat pisong ginagastos natin sa preventive healthcare ay higit na nakapagdudulot sa atin ng savings in the future. For example, just in our proposed estimated cost of HIV prevention and control efforts, kung halimbawa makapaglaan tayo ng 2.3 billion pesos between 2015 and 2030, this investment, 2.3 billion, Mr. President, less than 1% ng kasalukuyang proposed budget natin for 2018, it's expected to yield the following results: reduction of new infections to less than 500 per year by the first half of the next decade or year 2021, savings of 2.6 million disability adjust life years or DALYs or productive life years by averting 113,784 new infections, savings of 57 billion pesos in future treatment costs. Imagine, 2.3 billion ngayon over 15 years, 2015 to 2030. Ang dulot ay pag-save ng 57 billion pesos in future treatment costs, plus societal cost savings of 355 billion pesos in future income ng mga healthy Filipinos or Filipinos living with HIV, pero dahil sa mas pinalakas na PNAC, mas sapat at tamang paggastos para sa ating HIV and AIDS response, ay nanatiling malusog o kaya kahit may HIV na. In fact, Mr. President, kahit may AIDS na, may lifetime management yan to sustain the quality of life of the person. Mr. President.
Mr. President, again, basta papunta tayo dun sa benepisyo or sa pagkangalaga sa mga AIDS victims, wala tayong problema. I am very supportive. Ang problema ko is the way we're presenting it. Oh, for example, you said it's not. Sabi ko, bakit natin gagawin independent agency? Sabi ninyo, hindi. Article 1 of your bill, Section 4, page 10, line 2, it shall be an independent agency attached to the Department of Health. Anong klaseng English to?
Ang
Independent, attached?
Yes, Mr. President.
Ano, which one? Which is which? It's contradictory.
It's not contradictory,
E di
Mr.
alisin mo yung
President.
independent. It shall be an attached agency to the Department of Health with a separate budget under, siguro, because tinatarget ninyo na magkaroon ng separate budget under the General Appropriations Act. Patay tayo rito.
Mr. President, yung pagkakaroon po ng separate line item budget ay natural consequence ng magiging independent agency in terms of the policy formulation, but it remains attached to the DOH. In fact, gaya ng sinabi ko po kanina...
become an independent agency if it attached to the DOH?
Well, Mr. President, again, for purposes of clarity, at the proper time, I would be open to amendments. But the intent here is that it will be a strengthened, independent policy-making agency where other stakeholders, including other departments, will be members, but attached to the Department of Health. And in fact, as I said earlier, its proposed budget will be presented by the DOH within the Department of Health budget, but with their own line item budgets.
Well, you could have simply said, attached agency to the DOH with a separate budget under the General Appropriations. Ma-achieve din yung gusto ninyo. Pero hindi tayo contradicting. Di ba? Meron bang independent na attached?
I would be open to clarificatory amendments at the proper time, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you,
to
Mr.
further,
President. At
thank
the
you, Mr.
proper time.
President. To further present, the membership and composition of the PNAC shall be DOH, DepEd, DOLE, DSWD, DILG, NEDA, CSC, CHED, NYC, ULAP, 2 representatives from NGOs who have expertise in standard setting and service delivery, 7 representatives from NGOs working for the welfare of identified key populations, and a representative of an organization of persons living with HIV.
Now, now that you mention it, regarding its composition and membership, what is the rationale for removing Congress? Removal of the chairperson of the Committee on Health of the Senate or the House of Representatives or their representative as a member of the council. Inaalis natin. Bakit? Ayaw nila ng mga senador at congressman?
Hindi naman sila magkakaroon ng governing law kung hindi po nandun ng
Kaya nga,
ating
why are we
participation.
removing them? Then, removal also of 2 representatives from organizations of medical health professionals as members of the council na dati nandun. Tapos, addition of 3 representatives from NGOs as members of the council. which would make a total of 9 representatives from NGOs, from only 6 provided in the old law. Magiging 9, imbis na 6 yung NGOs. Okay sana kung yung mga gagaling na NGO. Kinakabahan ako, baka yung manufacturer ng mga syringe ang napasok ng NGO eh. Di ba? Na sinusuportahan or being sponsored, I mean, by these pharmaceutical companies, Mr. President. So why are we removing the Senate representative and the House of Representatives representative?
Mr. President, Congress can and does provide oversight function even when we are not a part of a council like the PNAC. The addition of NGO representatives is precisely one of the key features of the council proposed in this bill, which are different from the current law, the strength and participation of CSOs. Simply because, Mr. President, yung ating karanasan itong nakaraang mga taon, even since the time na nagkaroon na ng treatment, ARV treatment dito sa Pilipinas, essential talaga ang mas malawak pang o mas pinalakas pang pakikilahok ng mga CSOs because these are the partners of government and of the private sector on the ground in addressing the HIV and AIDS crisis in a multi-party way, Mr. President. And CSOs would represent the identified key populations. For example, Mr. President, the CSOs could represent the young Filipinos aged 15 to 24 years old who account for the most number of a big number of new cases now. Bahagi po ito ng pagbago ng profile ng HIV incidents, kaya kailangan natin ng
Kasi
bagong
bumababa ang
batas.
moralidad ng Pilipino, nakabataang Pilipino, kaya ganoon.
I think, Mr. President, I'm not ready to make that kind of a judgment about ourselves as a people. Ang sinasabi ko po ay for yung particular nature ng sakit na ito, yung modes of transmission niya, at yung kakulangan pa natin in providing a comprehensive, evidence-based, gender-inclusive approach, ay, in spite of our best efforts under the old law, ay umabot tayo sa ganitong sitwasyon. We cannot argue with the data na sa ayaw natin at sa gusto, at ayaw talaga natin, pero tayo ang number 1 in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of rate of increase in the number of HIV cases. So, ganito po yung sitwasyon na tutugunan ng isang pinalakas na PNAC, Mr. President.
Alright. Pinalakas yung PNAC, you remove the senator, you remove the congressman, lalakas yung PNAC. You remove the medical health professional as member of the council. Papalitan mo ng 3 NGO. Sino mag-a-appoint ng 3 NGO? Para lumakas, aalisin mo yung mga yun. Papalitan mo ng 3 NGO para lumakas dun sa dating 6 na. Who will appoint the NGO?
The President of the Philippines, the Republic, Mr.
How will you
President,
know
will
that
appoint
this
the
NGO is
representatives.
better than the chairman of the Committee on Health or a medical or health professional? How will you know if this NGO representative is better than a medical or health professional, Mr. President?
As before or as now, Mr. President, the President will appoint the NGO representatives to the PNAC based on the recommendations of the Department of Health. So at both those stages, gobyerno rin ang magnonomina at gobyerno ang appointing authority, Mr. President.
Madaling sabihin, Mr. President, but in actual practice, medyo, well,
Pero yun po
I do
yung
not want
practice
to
sa
belabor
ngayon,
the
Mr.
point because
President. The
I will
President
just-
appoints.
I will just accept your answer, but I will not agree.
Well, it's a matter of fact right now, Mr. President. Ang Pangulo ng Republika ang nag-a-appoint sa mga kasapi ng PNAC batay po sa mga nominasyon ng Department of
Oh
Health.
yes, but there is a Senate representative, House of Representative, medical professional representative. Tapos yung 6, aalisin mo yun, lalagay mo lahat, NGO. What is the rationale? Tell me straight, tell me, you do not trust the senator, or you do not trust the congressman, or the medical professional, the
Sir-
bill does not trust them. I don't mean you, Madam Senator.
Opo.
Di ba? Ganun ba? Mas trusted mo ang NGO na patatakbuhin yung PNAC. Is that the rationale? Why are we removing them? That
Mr.
is
President.
my question.
Yes, Mr. President. Of course, I do not, and I will not say that I mistrust myself or other colleagues in the Senate or in the whole Congress of the Republic. PNAC also has a manual of procedures. Okay, this is additional to earlier, but PNAC also has a manual of procedures on NGO selection. And may I point out, Mr. President, that even with the strengthened participation of CSOs in the PNAC, proposed a total of 9 from NGOs, that they are still, in numbers alone, outnumbered by representatives from the government agencies, the different departments, the NEDA, the different commissions, and even the ULAP, the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines. And it is even conceivable, Mr. President, na yung isa or ilan sa mga siyam na kinatawang ito mula sa NGOs ay mga medical professionals din. Because NGOs also count among their officers and staff, doctors, nurses, midwives, etc., who have, as required by the bill, expertise in standard setting and service delivery, or who work for the welfare of identified key populations, Mr. President.
Anyway, I didn't get an answer, Mr. President.
Mr. President?
I don't think I got an answer. Why we are removing a senator, congressman, and medical professionals?
Here, Mr. President, to reiterate,
Anyway.
Senate and Congress will still conduct oversight functions even without being a member of PNAC. In any case, it is in our mandate, Mr. President.
That's a different story, Mr. President. We all know that. Pagdating sa mga oversight, iba na ang dating dyan. Anyway, let me move on to one more point before I give way to our other colleagues who wish to interpolate. Just one more before I suspend. Relative to the provisions on HIV/AIDS education in schools, Republic Act 8504 states that flexibility in the formulation and adoption of appropriate course content, scope, and methodology in each educational level or group shall be allowed after, and I highlight this, consultations with parent, teachers, community associations, private school associations, school officials, and other interest groups. As such, highlighted again, no instruction shall be offered to minors without adequate prior consultation with parents who must agree to the thrust and content of the instruction materials. You deleted this in your proposed measure. Why did you delete this paragraph? Because in deleting this paragraph, are we not in any way removing the parental authority granted to the parents of the minor children under the Constitution and the Family Code of the Philippines, which includes the caring and the rearing of minor children for civic consciousness and efficiency, and the development of their moral, mental, and physical character and well-being? Once this is removed, why, Mr. President? Why are we removing this particular phrase?
Mr. President, we are proposing that education and information on HIV/AIDS be made a matter of right to health. The bill also proposes the development of education and information programs in different settings and target populations, including schools, with the inclusion of age-appropriate technical material for students. So what is age-appropriate for instruction of HIV? I point out to the good gentleman Section 12, which mentions age-appropriate instruction on the causes, modes of transmission, and ways of preventing the spread of HIV. Studies have documented that HIV/AIDS education is associated with delayed first sexual intercourse, reduced number of sexual partners, reduced likelihood of injecting drugs, among others. So this highlights the importance of educating the youth at the appropriate time. And ideally, this should be given before puberty and before sexual debut. So practically, this should be done at around the same age when the subjects of reproductive system and reproductive health are discussed to the students as already described, for example, in the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act. And the Departments of Health and Education already have a program for HIV/AIDS education. The DepEd had an issuance in 2012 directing the conduct of the school-based HIV and AIDS education program. This instructed the Health, Nutrition, and Center of the DOH to conduct orientation and training workshops on HIV/AIDS education among teaching personnel in identified HIV/AIDS hotspots. The bill reinforces, Mr. President, this program by mandating the inclusion in the curriculum in all schools. Schools which all include parent-teacher associations, which all count on and enhance the homeschool parent-teacher partnership in all aspects of education of the students, including the students' health, Mr. President. At pwede pong ilagay, just to belabor what is already the practice in our schools, pwedeng ilagay sa implementing rules and regulations ang consultation with parents, which is also already in other laws such as the RPRH law on age-appropriate education for students on various issues, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the answer is not responsive to my question, Mr. President. Anyway, I will pursue this matter and the education in learning institutions issue at a later time, Mr. President. In the meantime, I suspend my interpellation on the measure, and I ask that Senator Richard Gordon be recognized.
Just as a last point, Mr. President, for the good gentleman, the answer I gave is direct to the point, even on a similar issue in other laws like the RPRH law, which was discussed, that particular issue on age-appropriate education for students and the role of the parents and teachers was discussed in the Supreme Court.
Because I was expecting an answer, Mr. Mo. The response I was expecting was, it's not necessary because that's why we're deleting it. The lengthy answer, Mr. President, to me, did not respond to the question that I posed. But nevertheless, I said I will suspend already. And so may I ask that Senator Richard Gordon be recognized to continue with the interpellation.
Thank you to the good gentleman.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. May I ask the gentle lady if she's willing to yield to a few questions?
Certainly, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I was wondering why, I know that there's been a previous law here, why there is even need to form an agency. We are almost like a task force-oriented society. There will be a provision for budget here. When we do have a Department of Health that is supposed to be taking care of everything from TB to cancer to communicable diseases like bird flu, and we don't form committees just like that. Here we are forming a committee on HIV once more, and this is an agency that is going to be formed. I just wonder, it just dawned on me why we are so prone to doing that. May I know what the reason for this is?
Mr. President, the Philippine National AIDS Council is already an existing council. Yes, Mr. President. So the bill does not propose to create any new agency, but simply to enhance the participation of civil society organizations in the council, as well to streamline the functions of the PNAC. It is a council attached to the Department of Health, just as the department also, as the good gentleman from Zambales pointed out, has various structures, whether councils or committees or offices focusing on different health concerns, including focusing on different illnesses. I believe it is in recognition of the graveness of HIV and AIDS that even before this bill, under the old law, the PNAC was already created. So PNAC already exists in the old law, HIV and AIDS, even in 1998, was a serious development issue, and the Department of Health recommended it, and so worked closely with the Senate in coming out with that law, with the current law. HIV is a multi-sectoral issue, including issues of discrimination, education, as the good gentleman and I were discussing earlier, social welfare, human rights, etc., that may go beyond health, and that is why the PNAC profits from the membership of other departments, government bodies, and CSOs, Mr. President.
As I stated earlier, Mr. President, I don't know if the gentlelady heard me. I'm aware that there is a previous law. I just want to take a second look at it, because I don't know. Do we have one against leprosy?
What the Department of Health has, Mr. President, is an existing program to combat leprosy or Hansen's disease.
Do we have one against cancer?
The DOH, Mr. President, also has a cancer prevention program.
These are programs within the umbrella of a national agency that is provided for in an annual budget, Mr. President. Here, I know that this has been done before. We created an agency that would combat HIV. I sometimes wonder, I really am questioning the propensity of the legislature, including us, to keep on creating agencies just on for the fact that there are many, that it is the flavor of the year, or it's the flavor of the season. If we did that, Mr. President, then we should have a anti-bird flu agency attached to the Department of Health now, because that is even more dangerous. Flu is even more dangerous, Mr. President. I am not going against it. I'm just trying to ask the Senate to rethink this propensity to keep on perpetrating agencies that we need. We're supposed to be right-sizing. I mean, if we want to right-size, then let the Department of Health handle this, and they can put it as part of their programs. Insofar as discrimination is concerned, there are enough laws in our country which can cover any discrimination by reason of gender, by reason of, sexual identity or preference, or for that matter, physical infirmity. We have so many laws like that. But to create another agency, and I know we have created it, and we're just expanding it. This is just a thought. I'm being critical. I hope the gentlelady realizes that. I'm just being critical of this tendency to keep on creating special agencies that we would have to provide for in a budget, especially when you look at the statistics. The statistics are indeed alarming. I'm with the Red Cross. And by the way, Mr. President, I have a record of combating HIV in my community, in Subic. We eradicated it in Subic because we had an ordinance, and I don't see it in this law either, where all people involved in, what do you call this? Those involved, let's say, in nightclubs, musicians in nightclubs, they had to report every 2 weeks before the department, before the Public Health Office of Olongapo, to have a smear test, because, as you know, we had an American population there at that time. Navy, the U.S. Navy brought in sailors at the time, and we wanted to avoid that. So every 2 weeks, all the bar girls, all the musicians had to go and have themselves smeared, have a smear examination. And I had the temerity at the time. I will call it temerity because I wanted to make sure that they follow, that if they did not follow 100%, I would suspend the permit so that we could prevent a bigger spread of disease called STD. And then one time in 1986 or 85, and when he came back to Olongapo in 1987 or 88, we had already started a campaign against this mysterious disease. They were even calling it Legionnaire's disease at the time. And we started to ask questions about this, because this is being propagated by exchange of fluids. And because of this, Mr. President, we decided that we would include the bar girls into the program of examination, a smear program. And that's how we discovered we had 19 personalities working in the nightclub industry that had AIDS, including one homosexual. And we took care of all of them. And we promised that we would be with them until they pass on, and we did. But since that time, we eradicated AIDS because of that measure by a local government, which became the model for the Department of Health at that time. Now, Mr. President, I am just questioning the tendency of creating such agencies when, if you look at the statistics in Africa, 9 out of every 10, I believe, 91% in Africa, of the 23.8 million infected persons in Africa, 91% are HIV positive. And that's why they have one in Nigeria. If my memory serves correct, Nigeria. And in South Africa, they have one. But here, sure, we have 34,000 HIV infected people, and yet we're, I'm sure, laging handa, predict the plan, predict the program, and yet we're going to come out with another agency. I was wondering whether the money might be better spent, for example, for something more dangerous. In 1917, the flu virus killed 100 million people. 100 million people in 1917 and 1918. Nobody noticed it because it was affecting soldiers, American soldiers, German soldiers, French soldiers, British soldiers, and they made it a secret. It became known later on as the Spanish flu because the Spanish decided to acknowledge they had flu. So the stigma of flu was attached to the Spanish people because they were the ones courageous enough to say, we have a problem here. And they called it Spanish flu. But they did not create an agency against flu. They strengthened their public health system. This is precisely what I'm talking about. Now, if we're talking about creating a center for disease control like the one they have in Atlanta, I am most, on all fours, would be supportive of such a move. But if we start reacting every time there is an epidemic, like not even an epidemic, but because the statistics seem to be rising, I think that can be preventable by education. I think that can be preventable by local governments. I think that can be preventable by, information. And that's why those NGOs that you say are important. But if you create another agency, so the DOH has its hands full, and it takes away from the resources that should otherwise go to PhilHealth, because that's why we created the tobacco tax, so that we would have higher VAT, higher collections, so that it can address those problems. Well, to me, I'm just questioning why we continue to create agencies like this. I would not say on a whim. I think it's important, but I think we might need a better mousetrap for something like this.
Thank you, Mr. President. To reiterate, the bill is not proposing to create any new
please
agency.
let's go over there, because it might make me appear that I don't know my law. I know there is.
Yes.
I know there is such a law. I'm just saying, let's revisit that. Do we need this? And do we now need, if I'm going to follow this precedent, I will now say, oh, we have avian flu, and it might go to pigs, and then it might go to humans, and it has the propensity or the capability to kill thousands, hundreds of thousands. That can happen. And so we should have that. You see, to me, the reason why we have a Department of Health is to make sure, and that's why you have the RITM, right? In San Lazaro, and they take care of all these diseases, and they make sure that public health monitors all this so that they can immediately react. And once they react, they coalesce with the World Health Organization, they coalesce with the, that's the UN, and they coalesce also with the Center for Disease Control. So, anyway, I just wanted to make that statement. It's a pain. It's a pain to me because I think we can be better in solving these problems. Instead of just creating all these agencies and then tumataas pa rin. Meron na nga tayong agency dati, tumaas pa eh. Ano ginawa ng agency na yan? Meron tayong agency dati, tumaas pa rin. Okay, teka muna. Then we call the public health here, Secretary of Health, and say, hey, ano ginagawa nyo dyan? Bakit tumataas yan? Sabi niya, hindi kami dyan eh, meron kaming agency. Do you think the Secretary of Health is going to sit on this committee? She will send a representative. And everybody will send a representative. So it's not really 100% serious effort to try and eliminate the disease. So to my mind, there is a problem. And I have other questions, if I may go on.
Actually, Mr. President, Secretary Ubial has been chairing the meetings of the Philippine National AIDS Council in recognition of that HIV needs a multi-agency and multi-sectoral response. It has no cure. It doesn't even have a vaccine, unlike other illnesses that DOH is addressing. Other diseases have no stigma or discrimination, like for HIV. The graveness of the situation warrants that we require a multi-sectoral approach. We need a continued presence of a PNAC to foster collaboration among different agencies and CSOs to respond to the epidemic. This is not a flavor of the month, Mr. President. The first HIV patient was diagnosed in 1994. And now we are the #1 in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of rate of increase in the number of HIV cases. Hindi po tayo #1 sa Asia-Pacific sa ano pa mang ibang sakit, sa HIV lang. And recently, we have an international commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals to end AIDS by 2030. At hindi po natin maititigil ang paggapang ng AIDS sa lipunan natin if we don't address HIV. And that's why we need a new national policy, and we continue to need
Mr. President, with all due respect, you never heard me say we're not going to address HIV. In fact, I think I have the best record in the country for having arrested HIV in a locality. It's become a model all over. And by the way, just because it has stigma, but the TB has a stigma. Leprosy has stigma. I mean, you know, there is a tendency because this is promoted by many people, and I respect them. The homosexual community in America, for example, they're very active in this. And now they're asking to be treated in the same manner as we are, and I support that. Maybe I'm ready to support same-sex marriage. Maybe. But so far as I'm concerned, it is another one of those initiatives that I think are important but doesn't merit the creation of another agency or the perpetration of another agency. Let me just say, if there is a problem of rising HIV, I would call a meeting, if I were chairman of the Health Committee, the Department of Public Health. I would call the Department of Education and say, what are you doing? There's a rising issue here. So, if that is the case, then we can at least have the attention of the no less than the Secretary of Health, the Secretary of Education, that the Congress is very, appalled that these figures are rising. I follow that, by the way, Mr. President. So, if I may, I'd like to continue, and I just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. President, and maybe I may reserve a turno and contra just in case I may oppose this on those grounds, Mr. President. I would like to continue also, if I may. May I? Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President.
Sorry, Your Honor. Now, in your bill, in our bill here in the Senate, there doesn't seem to be any provision on high-risk professions, occupations that should be mandatorily tested. Do you agree with mandatory testing for high-risk professionals or You know, in Cambodia, HIV is transmitted in truck stops, where the truck drivers stop, have a little merienda, and then go in the back of the room, and there are willing victims or willing vulnerable women who are exploited, or even men who are exploited, and they propagate AIDS all over. So I would favor mandatory high-risk professional testing in these occupations which are high risk, but not on a voluntary testing, because under the police power we have to protect, as you say, the welfare of our young people, our countrymen, etc. There doesn't seem to be any mandatory testing here.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to turn the attention of the good gentleman to articles in the bill, which, though as a rule, prohibit mandatory or compulsory testing, but does provide for exceptions. And these are when it is necessary to test a person who is charged with any of the offenses punishable under Articles 264, 266, 335, and 338 of the Revised Penal Code as amended by Republic Act 8353, otherwise known as the Anti-Rape Law of 1997. And this is because, Mr. President, presence of a sexually transmissible disease is an aggravating circumstance in rape cases. Another exception, Mr. President, would be when it's necessary to resolve relevant issues under Executive Order number 209, otherwise known as the Family Code of the Philippines. And this is because, Mr. President, presence of an incurable sexually transmissible disease at the time of the marriage or the concealment of a sexually transmissible disease, whether curable or not, at the time of the marriage are grounds for an annulment. And as a prerequisite, and this will be of interest, I believe, to the good gentleman from Zambales, as a prerequisite in the donation of blood, in compliance with the provisions of RA 7170, otherwise known as the Organ Donation Act, and RA 7719, otherwise known as the National Blood Services Act. And even in those exceptions, Mr. President, it should be emphasized that the confidentiality shall be maintained. Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor, I read those provisions. I am with the Red Cross. I've been in the Red Cross, and my mother, I was exposed to my mother who was drawing blood from people for the last 63 years until her death. I continue to do that, and I continue to modernize our blood center. I think our blood center is one of the most modern, even more modern than the Department of Health. And we are aware of their kudos. And I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm patting my people who teach me how to make sure we have a top-notch blood center in the country. But let me just put it this way, Mr. President. All those are correct. Compulsory HIV testing shall be allowed only in the following instances. But of course, it doesn't really presume a situation where, for an example, somebody hides the fact or becomes vengeful, or, for example, a spurned lady or a spurned man, for example, and so that I will be gender friendly, or even a homosexual who has been hurt by his partner and decides to hide something knowingly that he has HIV and continues to have sex without protection and inflicting that. I mean, that's one exception that I have not seen here, that we should punish, actually. I would like to see a mandatory testing. I don't know. I'd like to ask the gentle lady what she feels about punishing those who hide it. And secondly, having mandatory testing, if we're going to support this bill, I would manifest right now that I would require mandatory testing for all high-risk professions or occupations, Mr. President. In fact, nagagalit yung mga ibang kwan dyan, but of course, the data doesn't show that our OFWs bring it in. The data does show that, especially in Mindanao, where it's highest. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you have the data. It's highest in Mindanao, where there is a male-to-male, the last time I saw it, about a couple of years ago, it was highest in Mindanao, where male to male, pagtatalik, nakakataas ang HIV doon. So far as I'm concerned, Mr. President, kulang ito, and that we should have mandatory testing for occupational, the high-risk occupational people, and we should punish to protect people from people who will deliberately omit to tell his partner, or for that matter, deliberately inflict punishment upon his partner or her partner for HIV or AIDS.
Mr. President, regarding geographic distribution, the top 5 regions actually are topped by the NCR, accounting for 42% of all cases diagnosed from 1984
that's why I said
to March
so.
2017.
And if you look at the data, NCR probably has the most number of nightclubs, massage parlors, and everything. That's why I deliberately said Mindanao, by knowing that NCR is one of the highest, always been one of the highest.
Yes, Mr. President, followed by Calabarzon at 14%, Central Visayas at 9%, Central Luzon at 9% also, and then the Davao region at 6%. In principle, or as a rule, Mr. President, mandatory or compulsory testing is prohibited in this bill, except for those exceptions that the good gentleman from Zambales and I talked about earlier, and one of these does involve concealment, as in his follow-up question, concealment of a sexually transmissible disease, whether curable or not, at the time of the marriage. But as for mandatory testing in other sectors, these are covered in the bill by prohibition. The bill, and I believe that mandatory testing should not be pursued, for example, in key affected populations, because this would be a practice that would promote stigma and discrimination against the key affected populations. It will be more effective as an alternative if our policies promote voluntary and confidential testing, encouraging encouraging individuals to get to know their status and to get tested. And this is consistent, Mr. President, with the idea of focusing on the positive roles of persons living with HIV and promoting their dignity. It's also important to note that the World Health Organization and UNAIDS have issued a position stating that WHO and UNAIDS do not support mandatory or compulsory testing of individuals on public health grounds. Additionally, Mr. President, for health workers, mandatory testing for health workers, we could ask that, but studies have shown that the risk of this happening, them transmitting the disease to their patients during surgery or other procedures, is low. Only 4 instances of this have ever been reported worldwide, not just in the Philippines.
Are you talking about the French one?
Mr.
Where in
President?
a laboratory they transmitted disease because they were, I think, they made a mistake in the examination of the blood, and they were able to transfuse blood coming from a French hospital or something like that.
Then perhaps,
or in
Mr.
Australia or in Canada, where the Canadian Red Cross almost got bankrupt because they were able to transmit blood by mistake that contained the HIV virus. Are you talking about that?
I'll get back to you, Mr. President, on the details of these 4 cases. It's possible that these cases cited by the good gentleman from Zambales are among these 4 cases. Or we could ask HIV screening for pregnant women mandatory. Owing to the possibility of HIV transmission from mother to child, HIV screening should be one of the routine tests recommended or encouraged for pregnant women. Nevertheless, even in this case, Mr. President, the mother can opt out or choose not to take the test, and the health provider cannot compel them or her to take the test.
Mr. President, I support all the things that the lady said about screening for pregnant women, but I cannot support a system where we say stigmatization. You know, when I got those bar girls, I did not even call them bar girls when I got them. I mean, I'm just using it so that it will be easier for everyone to understand. Because a girl working in a club, in our place is a hostess. I didn't even call them a hostess. I called them euphemistically, you know, people who work in the entertainment industry. It could be an actor, it could be an actress, it could be a bar girl. And the stigmatization that I wanted, and I quarreled with the priest about this, is when that Irish priest put in AIDS skills in the community of Olongapo. And I said, my gosh, how are you now going to get somebody who has AIDS to come forward and have herself tested? And that's why I had those billboards removed. And then I went every week and had sessions with these people. And I can tell you, the Los Angeles Times had a 2-page, you know, coverage of what we were doing in Olongapo, and this was taken and international newspapers took cognition of that. The Department of Health hailed what we were doing, because here's a government engaging people with HIV, in fact, encouraging them to tell their story to their peers, to their fellow workers, so that they would encourage the use of condoms, the use of protection, so that it will not spread. And it worked. But there was no stigmatization because we never revealed their identity. I'll tell you what stigmatization is, Mr. President. One of the girls went home, and we allowed her to go. If she got home, you know, the Department of Health said this lady has AIDS. And when she went home, she was immediately brought to a hospital. And in that hospital, she was not put in the population. She was put in a storage room. And when she attended All Saints' Day, or All Souls' Day, which is really the time that we should go to the cemetery, not All Saints' Day, it's for our Memorial Day, her parents and their family stigmatized her and refused to accept her. That's stigmatization. Now, we protected these women, and even this homosexual in Olongapo, and we went until, I can show you a picture of me with a dying AIDS patient in San Lazaro. I was holding her hand. I can show you pictures of me talking with them, and those are some of the private pictures that I keep. It evokes a tear in my eye every time I see them, because it was really a very, very difficult experience. An 18-year-old girl from Bataan says, "Why me?" And the story is, I put the gun in I put my gun out there, and I pretended to load it, when in reality, I was very good with guns at that time. I took out the round from the chamber, and I said, "Here, kill yourself. You're bringing everybody down, because you keep, you know, grieving to yourself and saying, oh, why did God do this to me? I'm a poor girl," etc., etc. And I was trying to put a teamwork among the ladies. And after that, she cried. I said, you know, you can prepare for your death. My father never had time to prepare for his death. He was just shot. And I told him, you'll probably die in about a few years. I was never lying to them. At that time, there was no retroviral drugs. And I can tell you, after that, I went to give a speech the following 2 weeks later in a graduation of a skills training center that I put up, and I said, this is a door opening to you, and I want to remind you that I'm in conversation with young women younger than you who don't have the opportunity to choose their livelihood. You now have livelihood because we try to do it for you, and you can be assured of work. And I broke down. And when I came back from the session, I said, "You really love me," she said. And she said, "Why?" I said, "Why should I love you?" And she said, "Because I rode the jeepney, and the driver was saying, and the pilot was saying, the mayor cried for this girl who had AIDS." And that was me. And at that time, everybody got in. I went to her death in San Lazaro with my aide, who's here. And Mr. President, that's why I say stigmatization is different from what we're talking about here. When you say stigmatization, Mr. President, that's what it means. You don't parade the women and tell them these girls have AIDS. But really, a bar girl, alam naman natin yan, meron pang tinawag tayo, a pom-pom. Nung bata kami, pom-pom. Di ba dito, pok-pok. Oh, these are stigmatizing words. But here, we have to protect the women themselves. When you screen them mandatorily, you are in fact protecting them. That is where you hide the results. When we get blood in the Red Cross, we tell them in an interview whether you have been sleeping with people that you don't know, and therefore when you do, we probably will not get their blood. Or if we do get their blood, we will tell them that they are not qualified to give blood, and we will take them to the San Lazaro, because we want to do it quietly and we want them to get counseling. Now, Mr. President, if we don't do that, then you're precisely creating the situation that this law intends to avoid, the spread and the increase of more AIDS. So, Mr. President, I know that the great intentions and the good intentions of the gentle lady, and I support that. But I am tough love always, Mr. President. We have to give tough love to our people in general and to the special people that have been victimized by this disease. And by knowing that they have it, we can help them. And that when they know that they have it, and they know that we can help them, we can help assuage or alleviate the human suffering and the spread of suffering, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I'd like to direct the attention of the good gentleman from Zambales to an additional exception in Section 46 penalties, letter C. Any person who knowingly or negligently causes another to get infected with HIV in the course of the practice of profession through unsafe and unsanitary practice and procedure shall, upon conviction, suffer the penalty of, and so on. So this is included as an act to be penalized. But still, Mr. President, with all due respect, I must reiterate that in principle, except for these exceptions, the bill prohibits mandatory or compulsory testing. And further, Mr. President, criminalization of transmission actually deters people from testing. And this means that people are not diagnosed until the late stages of AIDS, keeping people out of treatment. Studies show that criminalization of transmission actually increases rather than decreases HIV rates,
Excuse
Mr.
me,
President.
Mr. President, you never heard me say criminalizing those who have AIDS. I merely said we must mandatorily require those in this high-risk profession to come in. And I only support that when punishment, when they knowingly infect some other person. And it doesn't have to be by cause of revenge, but because if they know it, and they just want to do it out of pique, out of disgust for the world because they got AIDS. I have had stories of one girl who had AIDS, and she decided to go with everybody, or a man who had AIDS, and she kept on doing everything to everybody and was infecting everybody because he was bitter. And that is what we want to protect. Mr. President, when you have a pervert in America, there's a list of perverts. And you know, when they go to a neighborhood, that is stigmatizing. They are not welcome in the neighborhood. They have to report to the local community and say, there's a pervert or a sexual offender or a, here. Ito naman, hindi naman ganun ang mangyayari. You are precisely protecting them. I'm not one that subscribes on everything international. I couldn't care less. You know, the UN, my gosh, I know a lot about the UN. It's a great agency, but I know that they also do a lot of awful things with the money that is given them. It's not really effectively utilized at times. Same thing even with our society, and that is why I just don't follow the convention of international organizations. And ourselves, we also have our problems. So far as this is concerned, this is not just a passionate discourse here, but I think that we should really examine what we really want to do insofar as this is concerned. By the way, I thank you for putting all donated blood shall also be subject to HIV testing. But is the gentle lady aware that that technologically, I can tell all of you, I cannot assure that the blood I gave, even if you tested with me, is AIDS-free. Are you aware of that? Is the gentle lady aware of that?
I'm glad to learn about it from the good gentleman, Mr. President.
Well, I just want to assure you that it's not totally free. There is a window of anywhere from 18 to 30 days when you examine the blood, and it might escape. That is why we are very strong in interviewing the blood donor, and that is why we want to have galloners programs so that we have safe donors who give safe blood and quality blood, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, if we really are serious about this, then we should put a provision here that requires the government, and you don't even need this law, to provide for Red Cross and for other, by the way, we were the first blood society here, as I've said before previously, in the country. There could be support from the DOH, and they have done that before, where we now modernize the latest technique available to testing HIV blood, because that will cost anywhere from 45 to 60 million pesos. And you know, we have 80 blood banks and maybe 27 blood centers all over the country. Kahit nasa blood center lang, 27 times 40 to 80 million is a lot of money. That's why we can't afford it. And that's why, Mr. President, if we really are serious about this, then we should have a provision. If we really want to be safe, then we can bring it and put it in the law, because that will make blood safer.
Mr.
Yes.
President, at the proper time, if the good gentleman from Zambales has proposed amendments on ensuring the HIV-freeness of the blood donation or blood supply, and also about the testing protocols, then I'd be open to studying them, Mr. President.
I just want to say this as a final shot, and I do have other things. Mandatory testing is a requirement, I think, that is something that we cannot ignore. It's part of the police power of the state. It's the overriding principle of protecting state interests and protecting its citizens. The public health, public morals, these are all part of public welfare. These are all part of the police power of the state, Mr. President. So let us not just be quick about dismissing. Nobody is going to reveal the results of a blood test that is compulsory. He will be quietly brought to San Lazaro, and he will now get medicine, or she will now get more. I only say he because there are more male messengers of blood by transmission in this so-called problem today. And so, Mr. President, I think that it is important for all of us to understand that we should not be skittish about mandatory testing, Mr. President. Even when you go abroad, especially during the SARS epidemic, I was Secretary of Tourism, Mr. President. They didn't know, but we were mandatory testing every passenger that arrived. There was a ray gun that came in as you passed the airport before you hit immigration, and we put the ray gun in front of you to find out whether you have a fever, etc. And so that when you have a fever, we will set you aside and we will take you to the hospital for testing. There was a tent. And precisely, Mr. President, this is what I caution everybody on. It is not just a simple problem, Mr. President. Last night, I spent 3 hours with my staff, with Dr. Susie Mercado, whom I got for the Red Cross, who's retired from World Health, on the problem of avian flu. And we are making preparations already, Mr. President, just in case. It's far-fetched, but nonetheless, having read the very, very horrendous situation that happened in Europe and in America, where 100 million people were killed, some say 50, some say 100, it killed more people than all the wars combined. And we were already making ready there. And by the way, if that happens, people will be required mandatorily to present themselves, and I don't think we can even provide enough space in our hospitals for them in case it spreads. So really, there is need for a proper SARS approach. We all have SARS in this country already, Mr. President. It's called Severe Awareness and Responsibility Shortage. SARS, not the technical definition. And if that is going to happen, Mr. President, we have to know what we're doing. That's why I make this point, not in opposition, but to say, tarry a little, as in Merchant of Venice. Tarry a little. There is something else. And that is what I'm talking about here. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, gentle lady from...
Thank you to the,
Bye.
excuse me, to the good gentleman from Zambales. Excuse me. Just as a last point about his remarks on discrimination. In fact, the bill lists discriminatory acts against persons living with HIV, which are born out of the experiences of persons living with HIV. And these include, Mr. President, discrimination in the workplace, discrimination in learning institutions, restriction on travel and habitation, restrictions on shelter, prohibition from seeking or holding public office, exclusion from credit and insurance services, discrimination in hospitals and health institutions, denial of burial services, and other similar or analogous discriminatory acts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, move to suspend the consideration of Senate Bill 1390.
Objection. Hearing none. Motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1439 under Committee Report number 60. We were about to adjourn, but this is just a simple amendment, Mr. President. We will not close it.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
This is the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop. Parliamentary status is that we already terminated the period of interpellations. We are in the period of amendment. So may we recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Gatchalian, to introduce an amendment.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last May 31, 2017, I moved that the basis of the interpolation of SB 1439 shall be based on an amendment by substitution. Today, I would like to introduce such amendment. I move that the text on page 1, line 12, beginning with the word developers, until page 13, line 9, ending with the word 27, be stricken out. I so move, Mr. President.
Can we have it again? You move that
That the text on page 1, line 12, beginning with the word developers,
beginning with developers,
until page 13, line 9, ending with the number 27, be stricken out.
is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion is granted.
I therefore move that the entirety of the stricken out text be replaced with the text
To be
which
replaced.
our office distributed last May 31, 2017 to the respective centers' offices. Such text starts on page 1, line 12, beginning with the word proponents, until page 16, line 14, ending with the number 29. So move, Mr. President.
If the Secretariat will confirm that we already have a copy of that document referred to by the sponsor. Can we have a minute suspension?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Baka di siya masundan kung walang copy.
May binigay ka na ba?
Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, there is a confusion on the substitute bill, so I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1439.
Is there no objection? Okay, there being none, we suspend consideration of the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to manifest that Senator J.B. Ejercito has been made an additional vice chair in the Committee on Finance.
The manifestation is noted.
Also, Mr. President, upon the request of Senator Gatchalian, I move that he be voted as an added member of the Special Committee on the Rehabilitation of Marawi City.
So the election of Senator Gatchalian as a member of that new special committee is hereby noted.
And also, for the record, the Senator Gatchalian wishes to insert into the records a co-sponsorship speech on the creation of the special committee.
So let the co-sponsorship speech of Senator Gatchalian be inserted into the records.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, August 22, 2017.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned. The session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, August 22, 2017.